Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube, and Happy New Year, everybody. Happy NFL New Year. We finally get to explore some free agency today because it all starts today at 4 p.m., Sam. NFL New Year.
We're going to review free agency a few hours before free agency starts.
I love the NFL. I love the way they do it. I'm just glad. I'm glad we didn't fake the tampering thing anymore. We kind of like faking it, but, it's all legal. So we're going to go team by team, because that's what we do here on the show. We have this history of, let's talk about the big stories. And it's like, let's just go team by team. Let's just cover everything. So we're going to touch on the AFC today, free agency winners and losers, go through each team, what they've done, what's still to come, maybe how it affects draft strategy. And we'll do the same thing tomorrow with the NFC. And I'm sure we'll break off into some rambles and some longer conversations and some think pieces between us. So it's going to be a lot of fun talking free agency. We've already talked a lot about free agency. So some of this is review and some of it's just, pulling it all together.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, man, let's start at the top. So we're just talking AFC here today. Appreciate everybody for being here. We're still close to 35,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you are here and not a subscriber, think about it. Think about pressing that button. Think about pressing that subscribe button right now. Get us to 35K. We've been doing this since August, and appreciate everybody that's joined us on this new journey. Also, welcome to everybody who said they didn't find us the entire season, maybe followed us during our PFF days, Sam. There are still people trickling in who didn't realize, Check the Mic, new show under the 33rd team, that this thing started in August. They thought we disappeared for an entire season.
Yeah, amazing to me, but they still exist, and welcome to those people.
Welcome. We're amazed by you, but we're glad you're here. Let's start with some superlatives. So back and forth, we'll do a best move in the AFC, most puzzling move, and then we'll go with our favorite team, essentially, and then we'll go team by team. So what was your favorite move by any AFC team, Sam?
Yeah, well, in order to do that, I'm going to need to open the document so that I can remember what I wrote in there.
It was a trade of a big, fast receiver.
It was. And by that genius clue and opening the document, that leads me to tell you that my favorite move was Pittsburgh trading for DK Metcalf. Okay, they then had to give him, pretty substantial contract. Not quite, top of the market money. I mean, Justin Jefferson is $5 million a year more, and that's off a year-old contract. Jamar Chase is looking for a deal that's $10 million a year more and may well get it. But DK Metcalf within that offense, I think, is a really nice fit. Now, we still have the unknown of who the quarterback's going to be to throw him the football, but theoretically, this is now a good situation for this Pittsburgh offense to thrive with George Pickens, with DK Metcalf, with a collection of receivers that can combine for the rest of the area of the offense that needs to be targeted. Now you just need to find a quarterback that you can slot in there. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is one of the options out there. But either way, I really like that move as a real needle mover for this offense.
No, I agree. I like that move a lot for Pittsburgh. I am now fascinated, though, if it is DK and George Pickens together. We'll talk more when we go through the Steelers, what their roster looks like right now and some of the decisions that they still have to make. But yeah, even ahead of waiting on Aaron Rodgers' decision, which supposedly, like, I made a joke that it might take 3 to 4 months. That was a joke, right? This is Steve's funny. Ha, ha, ha. Peter Schrager today is saying it could take up to 4 weeks. Like, legitimately, he's just going to hold the Giants and Steelers hostage. I mean, he really wants to be the next Brett Favre here.
It's just, I cannot get over the symmetry of their careers at this point. It is insane. Like, Rodgers went out of his goddamn mind because Brett Favre did this offseason willy won't he dance for years until eventually they were just like, all right, enough. Go away. It's Rodgers' time. You can go play for the Jets or whoever, right? And Rodgers is now doing it. Now, okay, he's at least not doing it anymore on a team, right? It's just this general willy won't he. But he is holding, again, it's the same idea. He is holding teams hostage while he just dillies and deliberates about whether he wants to play football or not. Like, it's a different sport, right? But Dana White would always say this about UFC fighters. If you have to think about it, it's time to hang them up, right? If it's even remotely a debate, it's time. Retire already. I kind of feel like that about football. Like, if you're not that into it, it's probably time to call it a career.
We're we're still talking about it. We're still talking about it. Makes the news for us. But yeah, the DK move, I do like that quite a bit for Pittsburgh. My favorite move in the AFC, though, Dre Greenlaw, the linebacker from the San Francisco 49ers, signing with the Denver Broncos. I liked a lot of what the Broncos did, signing all of the 49ers guys, Hufanga in the secondary as well. But man, Greenlaw, I think, just has that there's not a whole lot of you trust these linebackers on all three downs, can play coverage, flying around the football. I mean, it's tough to get out of my head the one game where we saw Dre Greenlaw with like 10 tackles in the first half when he came back from injury last year. I do believe if he doesn't get hurt, Greenlaw, in the 2023 Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. Remember, the Niners had that game in control, and I know the Chiefs always make their late comebacks and everything, but that was like Greenlaw tears his Achilles running out onto the field, and that game was different after. And so the Niners were blessed to have him and Fred Warner side by side, and maybe Greenlaw went a little, under the radar just because of how good Fred Warner's been. But I think Greenlaw adds so much to that Denver defense that's already really good. And so they added a lot of energy to the middle of the defense, a guy that can make a ton of plays on all three downs. So love the Greenlaw move. And of course, the great Morgan Moses to the New England Patriots. I have to mention that as my other favorite move in the AFC.
I was going to say, I can't believe that's not your best move. Just immediately, like, state it, like giant banner, graphic, whatever. That's clearly the best move in Steve's eyes. Yeah, like, it's too much, I think, to say, and you didn't say this, I'm not saying you did, but it's too much to declare that like Dre Greenlaw going down changed the winner of that Super Bowl. But you could see the impact it had on the 49ers defense. Like that like emotionally affected the rest of those defenders. They're like, there's behind the scenes, what are they, the sound effects guys, like you could see there's sort of clips of it where you can see them reacting to like Dre Greenlaw just running out in the field, pops his Achilles, and it really deflated the entire defense. How much did that make an impact? We'll never know, but it definitely made an impact. I mean, you can't deny that made a difference in that game. And whether that was just, it would have been the same for any guy on that defense, or whether, Dre Greenlaw has a particular resonance, leadership, value to that defense. Either way, I think it's a good move.
How about on the other ends, the most questionable move or puzzling move in the AFC for you, Sam?
Yeah, before we get to that, I feel like I have to weekly declare that, again, this is not booze, even though it's in what is effectively supposed to be a wine glass, but it's a latte. See, I think I can actually prove it this
Cheers.
time.
You're drinking a latte?
So, well, yeah, why not?
You never drink lattes.
Well, I've got the Nespresso machine with the milk frothing doohickey on the side, which is very convenient, except for two minor flaws. The first of which is it's a giant pain in the ass to clean once you use it, right? So it's like, I would like to use this, but I then have to clean it, and that's a negative. The second giant pain in the hoop with this thing is that it has two lines in it, right? Like minimum amount of milk required, maximum amount of milk required. But if you're anywhere near the maximum line, and by that I mean like anywhere near it, it just overflows and like explodes everywhere, right? Uh-oh. I've moved.
Did I activate your camera? I feel like
somebody did. Anyway, anywhere near it, it just overflows and it's a complete cleaning disaster. So anyway, recently I've been like, you know what? I'm gonna dip into the latte market for a bit.
Rest in peace, Nespresso sponsorship. I mean, if you could.
I'm just helping them with their product. Like it needs some refinement. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you could maybe accentuate the positives, maybe they'd actually sponsor us on the show.
I said it was a great thing with two
minor flaws. Minor flaws. Because you're usually Americano guy. Never seen you, mix milk in any form or fashion. I'd also like to declare this is back to caffeinated coffee for the second straight day here. We're
also like, forget the Nespresso sponsorship. We're both here hammering the Yeti sponsorship. We could get one of those.
Can we get some Check the Mic Yetis? Yeti, Are you here? We must have some listener that's like an exec for Yeti or something like that. Please. I should tell the story of this mug. This is the 5-year anniversary this week of this mug for me. It was in the PFF offices being unused. And when we went home for COVID, I took it, and I've been using it every day since.
Nice.
So this is 5 year. Just realized 5-year anniversary
of this. For that.
of this yet. They might come after me. They've
My,
been looking for it, I'm sure.
I mean, before we descend too much into just two old people talking about mugs, literally my favorite mug that still is like it's a free mug we got from a Mint Mobile sponsorship years ago. It's just
Yeah.
like the perfect camper tin, mug thing. There's
Yeah.
something about it. It's my favorite mug, and it was free.
I love it. That's how I feel about this. I've tried other sized Yetis. I've tried different. It's my favorite one. There's also a partner slash. I mean, it's a Sport Radar mug.
Right.
It's a partner slash competitor all at the same time for PFF. So I spin it around to hide it. So it's great. They're all partners. It's all good. Let's get back on track here. This is a terrible show. Most puzzling move, Sam, while you're not drinking alcohol and you're drinking your latte over there.
You say that. That's probably like the finest 3 minutes we've done this week.
Maybe.
I think the most puzzling AFC move was the giant contract handed out to Dan Moore Jr. And I say that as a Dan Moore Jr., I wouldn't say enthusiast, nor would I say, defender necessarily, but like moderate advocate, Dan Moore Jr. is not a terrible player. That's about as far as I would go. Dan Moore Jr. He belongs in the NFL and probably belongs starting on an offensive line, but he probably doesn't belong earning $20 million plus a year for that privilege, somewhat. So that's what I would say. Like, the Tennessee Titans did need to continue working on that offensive line. They've done good work. Like, they were by far the worst offensive line in the NFL for years, and they've rebuilt it. It is no longer the worst offensive line in the NFL. It does still, however, need some work. So I'm fine with finding a new, offensive tackle or whatever. And I'm also kind of fine with Dan Moore Jr. being that guy. Really, it's just the money that they've given to him. I just can't square that circle. I can't find a reason to justify Dan Moore Jr. getting that cash, even in a world where, the top guys had already been signed. The market was kind of going crazy. It just feels the whole thing like it's just a big overpay across the board.
Yeah, I mean, we preach creep back toward average, and this is a creep back toward average move, but at elite money. I mean, that's the bottom line with it.
Not
right?
elite
if it was
money, but like high money.
But high end money, right? I mean, if it was like $10 million a year, which is not the going rate for a starting left tackle now, but if it was, you'd say, okay, that's pretty good. But like a Larrick Jackson range or something to that effect, you would say, okay, that because they're probably similar players at this point in their careers. So that's the question. The one defense that I make of this move, because I kind of wanted to pick it too, but didn't want to double up. The one defense I have is the move of JC Latham to the right side. So it's an expensive move to secure JC on his probably more comfortable side. And I think JC Latham's going to be a good player. And the Titans' right tackle spot has been maybe the worst in the NFL over the last couple of years. So I think there's a residual effect that they're paying a lot more money for to kind of make that happen.
But that's like, I mean, again, that's the reason why you need a left tackle. It's not a reason why you pay Dan Moore Jr. $20+ million a year. I mean, so it's not apples to apples because number one, he signed before hitting the market. Number two, ages, etc. They're all different, right? But like Ronnie Stanley is getting less money than Dan Moore Jr. to play left tackle this year. And in fact, for the duration of their contracts, that's insane. Like that. I mean, that's a wild disconnect.
It's further advocating for, re-sign your own, don't let people hit the market. And then the people that do hit the market, buyer beware, always in free agency. Because you picked Dan Moore Jr., I'm going to go with a former Titan. I'm going Harold Landry going to the Patriots. I thought the Patriots made a lot of good moves and made the team better. And I understand the familiarity with Mike Vrabel. I understand the culture aspect of it. I think he's a fine run defender. He's just been one of the worst down-for-down pass rushers in the NFL over the last couple of years. So maybe for a big chunk of his career, he does have that profile of doesn't win a ton of one-on-ones, but finishes plays. So the sack totals look good at the end of the year, but I don't think he's really a dominant player. If New England can improve in one or two more spots on the defensive line, they already have Milton Williams adding that interior pressure. If they did add in Abdul Carter for some reason, might make Landry look all the better, right? He's good at finishing plays when other guys are doing the work and, flushing quarterbacks from the pocket, whatever it might be. So that it could still show up in the sack totals. I just think it's a lot of money for Landry, but I get it. Again, I get all these moves, especially when you have so much money to spend or you have a massive need like New England has or Tennessee at left tackle.
That's the thing. Like, doesn't it feel like, we've talked before about how teams have gotten better generally at working their rosters. Consequently, the free agent group isn't as good as it used to be, or at least theoretically isn't as good. The star power isn't there. Doesn't it also feel like it's having an effect where there isn't as much crazy, like silly money flowing around? Like back when everything felt more half-assed and sloppy and kind of ill-conceived, giant money was being thrown around at star players, but also giant money was being thrown around at players that weren't particularly good. Now, we've quibbled with the Dan Moore Jr., with the Harold Landrys, but like they're not egregious moves. I mean,
No.
I think like Dan Moore Jr., if it was $5 million less a year, it would be fine, right? That's kind of going rate for an average left tackle that struggles against elite players. My problem is like they're paying him, $20+ million a year, and I feel like that is $5 million a year plus too much money. But it's not like, oh, this is the worst move I've ever, it's not like so bad. You're like hammering this team, being like, what could they be thinking? This is just straight idiocy. Like, there's no logic to this. Same with the Landry thing. It's like, that's an overpay. I wouldn't make that move. But again, I get it. It's not like insane. It's not egregious. Whereas in the past, there have been moves where like, I have no earthly idea what this team is thinking with this move. This is like straight dumb and will not work out. I feel like those have like disappeared now.
I kind of miss the days. Was it Ndamukong Suh kind of broke the bank? Were these both Dolphins? No, it was who paid Olivier Vernon? Was that the Dolphins too?
Yeah.
That paid him a ton of money? Like, he wasn't the best pass rusher in the world. You're like, this is a massive overpay, but like Olivier Vernon's resetting the market. And Ndamukong Suh, of course, was a prized free agent, and he reset the market. You don't see as much of that because some of those guys never hit the market, right? Those guys that are going to reset things. How about biggest winner in the AFC as a team? And we'll go team by team off the back of this. Who's your favorite so far?
So, and I think this is part of the flip side of the same coin. I feel like the moves are all just sort of in the middle. It's like there's no outstanding, wow, this is incredible. This team's done remarkable things. And there's no, this is a disaster. This team's terrible. So I guess Denver, I like pretty much everything they've done. They haven't done a ton, but the moves that they've made, I think, have been solid additions and, have ticked some boxes for them. They bring in Talanoa Hufanga. You seem to be a lot higher on that move than I am. I feel like he's the guy whose highlight reel sticks in the memory. And it's like, the potential of what he could be, the Troy Polamalu light. And it's like, I don't know if he's actually that guy. Dre Greenlaw, I think, is a really nice move. Matt Parrott is a nice depth signing the offensive line. And Trent Sherfield is not an insignificant wide receiver, potentially for them in particular. So it's not spectacular, but it's just solid moves, each one of which I think is incrementally moving an already good roster in the right direction.
Yeah, I would have picked the Broncos. I think if you hadn't, I think the Greenlaw thing I already talked about. Again, I am probably higher on Hufanga, and then DJ Jones coming back. I like what Denver's done. It is interesting to me that what I like about it from a Denver perspective is that they had a good defense and then added to it. And they said, look, we could easily sit here and say, oh, we had a top 5 scoring defense and we overachieved and we led. I think they led the league in sacks. I never look at sack totals, but they had all those guys with a ton of pressures. They schemed it up extremely well, and they added to it. Right? They're saying we need to keep our foot on the gas. We're trying to beat the Chiefs. We're trying to beat the Chargers. Right? We made the playoffs last year, but we're trying to be the best team in the AFC West. And they showed up their defense. And I think they've got some more work to do offensively, another playmaker or two, maybe some O-line depth, running back position. But I think, handling some of those issues in some of the, upgrading the defense in free agency, I think was a really nice move for Denver. So I don't know how long we're going to spend on each team here. I mean, does part of the discussion I want to have on the teams is how does this affect draft strategy? And I think a lot of, for Denver in particular, adding, say, 2 starters to the defense, does this mean they're going all offense in the draft? I know that's not really how teams build, but when you look at their needs, they've been linked to a tight end. They've had Evan Ingram in the building. I think that would be a really nice move for Denver. Ingram's gone. He's visited both the Broncos and the Chargers. Ingram's not great, but I think he's cogent. He's good enough, man. I think he is a solid receiving tight end, still has enough speed to work the middle of the field, get open against man coverage. He's pretty good. Not great. He's pretty good. And I think that would help a lot for Denver or the Chargers and not force that mock draft pick. I hate when the mock draft pick for teams is like, it's got to be a tight end because I don't see any needs everywhere else. Like if you're Denver, I don't think you want to go into the draft and be like, man, we got to get Colston Loveland or we have to get Tyler Warren. If they fall and they're good, that's fine. But I'd be interested to see if they go sign Ingram.
But that's only kind of a problem if it results in a reach or a pursuit of a player who doesn't really belong at the spot you're picking, and you have to kind of go after that guy at the expense of something else. For the Denver thing, it kind of like they're getting mocked a lot to Loveland or Tyler Warren, less so Warren, just because people expect him to be gone by then. But like it just feels like a natural fit. Like Loveland is probably supposed to go around that kind of area, and Denver could use a tight end. It's like it's a nice sync of need plus player value at that spot. Like the only way it's a problem is if something ridiculous like Travis Hunter slides and he's available there, and you're like, nah, we got to take the tight end because we've left ourselves in that position. Like otherwise, it's just a nice fit of player and team need, right?
No, I agree. I'm just saying I'm more like criticizing the mock drafters because we all do this, right? You look up and down a roster, it's like, wow, Denver's pretty good. Do I need a defensive lineman? No. Do I need a cornerback? No. Do I need an offensive lineman? No. What do I need a tight end? Give them a tight end. And they could use a tight end. I just don't know. I just think there might be better value on the board for Denver in the second wave of tight ends. The Elijah Arroyos of the world and the Mason Taylors of the world could be a better play when you could still get an impact defensive lineman in the draft. So I would love for Denver to fill the tight end need ahead of the draft and then take the best player available, right? Take one of those great edge rushers or whatever. And you could say, oh, they've got a great pass rush. Like you literally can't have too many. And some of those guys are going to have to get paid over the next couple of years. You want to replenish that position. I would rather them take a higher value position than tight end and just continue to not rest on what they've done from a roster building standpoint.
I mean, I'm all for just insulating, making sure that it's not a need and just removing that as a potential concern. Like if you grabbed Evan Engram, it doesn't stop you drafting Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren in the first round, but it does mean that you don't need to chase that or shoehorn the value. If you do have two players that are, let's say, equally graded, but one is a more valuable position, you can go for the more valuable position. You're not dictated by need. So I'm fine with it. I just don't, I think I have no problem right now with the kind of natural joining of one of those two tight ends that are expected to go in the first round and Denver in the first round, because it just seems to make sense.
All right, Broncos are done. That's your favorite team, in a list of pretty good, as you would say, nothing that stands out as the best. I like what Denver's done quite a bit, so I didn't want to pick them as well. I'm going to go the Buffalo Bills as my AFC winner. And again, it's not, to me, it's not for anything flashy. I think when you look at last year to this year, and the Bills story, I think, is a good one for teams that are losing players. Say the 49ers. If you're a 49ers fan watching and you're saying all of our big name players are leaving, well, that was Buffalo last year at this time, losing both starting safeties and starting center and all these guys who had been a huge part of what the Bills had done over the previous years. And they said, nope, we got to reset this thing. We have to get younger. And so I think what I like a lot about what Buffalo did is the re-signing and extending of their own. And they rejigged Josh Allen's contract. They extended Khalil Shakir at wide receiver, and they extended Gregory Rousseau on the edge. And so the difference in Buffalo last year to this year, where they were moving on from their older veterans, and now this year the focus is on the re-signing of their own players. And with the crazy money being thrown out there to pass rushers and edge rushers, getting Rousseau right now, I think is fantastic. Getting Khalil Shakir is fantastic. And then all of the complementary moves that they made, we've talked a lot about their ability to have an X receiver or a field stretching vertical threat. I mean, Josh Palmer may not be great for 3 years, $36 million. That might not be the right price for him, but I think that fills a potential vertical need for them where he doesn't have to be the guy. And, he was a good complementary piece for the Chargers. He could be a good complementary piece for the Bills. And then since the last time we sat over here and rambled about free agency, they signed Joey Bosa. They were not in the Joey Bosa sweepstakes. By reports, it was supposed to be the 49ers, a couple other teams kicking the tires, but they have Joey Bosa on a 1-year deal. And so I would bubble wrap him until January and just get him out there. And, he's played like 800 snaps over the last 3 years. So 1 year, $12.6 million. Maybe I'm doing the same thing I do with Marcus Davenport every year, saying, love this. But again, it's a high upside play bringing Joey Bosa in here if he could stay healthy, helping that pass rush.
Yeah, and they added Larry Ogunjobi as well since we were last talking. So, yeah, they definitely made some moves. The Bosa thing is interesting. It is reasonable money if you get anything out of him, but I think that is a fairly significant risk at this point in his career. But it is similar to I think you're right. It's like the Von Miller deal, right? It's like if you can just be around and healthy for the playoffs, that would be enough, right? Genuinely, I honestly wonder in this world now of these teams that can almost guarantee, playoff spots before the season, the teams that we expect or know will probably be contenders. If there's a world where they do start managing injury risk like the NBA, where it's like we don't need you for this stretch, right? You can just get healthy, rest up, you get in the recovery room, do all those kinds of things. We'll see you again in January. That's when we need you to be cooking, maybe a week 18 game just to get you knock the rust off. But we need you cooking in playoff football. We haven't seen that yet. I do kind of wonder though, if we're going to approach this world with some of these guys that are clearly really good, but have had a history of injuries, need some recovery time, maybe just need a time to reset and get healthy. And Bosa would be a perfect candidate for that.
Yeah, in the other part, because I think it's a great point, Sam, and I think the NBA also talks about, and I remember having these conversations with the late Dr. Eager, still alive with the Panthers. But NBA teams study the regular season versus the playoffs, and they study, and Sloan Analytics panels and stuff have talked about this. Your regular season team and strategy is different than your playoff strategy. I remember talking to Eric about that and thinking, trying to brainstorm, is that possible in the NFL? And I don't know that it is, because it's such a small sample size. And
right.
As I keep saying, if you go back, let's study the Super Bowl winners, it's all right, just have Patrick Mahomes or have Tom Brady and you're going to win 70% of the Super Bowls. But I do wonder if the load management thing is a thing. And then I look at the Bills, and we talk a lot about free agent strategy, and it's just tick the boxes of your starters. Make sure you have starters so you go into the draft. This is going to feel like a really good offseason for the Bills, because they've got the Joey Bosas and Josh Palmers and Larry Ogunjobis of the world, Michael Hoyt in there as well. And as much as I don't love dropping him into coverage all the time, I know he's in the 260s now, not 300, but it does bring some versatility up front.
You've got to assume Buffalo will do that less than the Rams did, random plays where Michael Hoyt is covering a slot receiver 40 yards downfield.
Probably going to do that less than the Rams, but he can be an effective rotational pass rusher, right? And so they have Rousseau and Bosa. AJ Epenesa's back. Hoyt, that's 4 deep on the edge. Javon Solomon, last year's draft pick, that's 5 deep of guys that I think can somewhat effectively get after the quarterback. Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Larry Ogunjobi, Dwayne Carter, 4 deep at defensive tackle. I think they already have their 9-man rotation on the defensive line right now, and they have their late first-round pick and 2 seconds, right, in the 56 and 62. It's going to feel pretty good, I think, if you're a Buffalo fan, coming out of this offseason where the depth is there at key spots, and they could go into the drafting the best players with 3 picks in the top 62. I think that is a great place to be. So again, it's not flashy. It's potentially high upside with a guy like Bosa, but it's the ability to go into the draft, and they could draft another defensive lineman with one of those 3 picks. They could draft some offensive line depth. They can draft the best playmaker available, whatever it might be, or that starting corner. They're supposed to be close with Asante Samuel potentially as well. And if they fill that need, they really are going into the draft with 0 needs as far as their starters go, and almost 0 needs on their 2 deep. That's how well they've done, I think, to restructure this roster and get in a good spot for the future.
Yeah, I mean, this is the perfect kind of deployment of free agency, right? You go and tick those boxes, and then you can still upgrade those players, but at least you have a worst case scenario already in place so that you're not in a position where you have to chase the player just to fill the starting spot.
Yesterday, we gave our guy Harrison a shout out, 33rd Team Zone. Harrison, not my son, Harrison.
No.
We gave him a shout out for the gear. He's over here texting us during the show here.
Wow.
Come on, man.
Maybe
You're just going to text us during the show?
I mean, maybe he just has confidence in your ability to multitask.
No, I can't. No, I'm very unprofessional. Like, you can't do this on TV. You can't say, hey, stop texting me, dude. But in podcast land, we can. So, come on, man. Anything else on the Bills? We'll go team by team through the rest of the AFC East.
No, I think that's Buffalo done.
New England Patriots. Let's start with the Patriots. What are your thoughts on what New England's done? They've spent a ton of money, added a lot of players. Do you think have they gotten better, Sam?
Yeah, well, any of these things, when you bring in a ton of guys, theoretically, you should be getting better. Like, it's unlikely that the net of a bunch of players that you add in is going to be a negative one, because, one or two might not work out. But theoretically, if you just add a bunch of bodies, they're supposed to all be upgrades. Even if you're wrong on a couple of them, the net should be still positive. So, yeah, I think they've gotten better. Milton Williams, obviously the kind of jewel of that group, an impact pass rusher, the highest PFF pass rushing grade of any defensive tackle last season. Now, I think that will come down. I don't think he is the best interior pass rusher in the NFL. Obviously, he benefited from being on a defensive line next to Jalen Carter, with all those talented pass rushers there. Now he's going to have to be the guy. So that will, I think, affect his efficiency and affect his production. But he should still be a really good addition for them. Carlton Davis might be the next one that I think has the biggest impact. Davis is a good cornerback. Like, that's a capable starter that you're bringing in. I don't love the Harold Landry move. I think that's an overpay. I think this is kind of a legacy thing. Mike Vrabel coached Harold Landry back in Tennessee. He played a lot of snaps in Tennessee. He was productive in certain ways, but I think he's always been a relatively inefficient pass rusher who's gotten by on volume and a kind of skewed sack rate. But I don't know how much he's upgrading that unit. But yeah, like, they've added some interesting players, a couple of which I think will make a real impact for them.
They added Morgan Moses, who I mentioned. Yeah, I like what New England's done because they had money to spend. And I know we've talked about, hey, a lot of this was on the defensive side of the ball. And I don't think the free agent results are always a perfect indication of strategy. I don't think New England went in and said, we have to take care of the defense over the offense. The reports were that they offered over $30 million to Chris Godwin at wide receiver. They understand the desperation of the wide receiver need. I think they've been in on every single receiver that's been out there. They just haven't either been chosen when it comes to Chris Godwin or given up enough or whatever it might be. So there's still work to do on the offensive side of the ball. But as we've talked about before, I think this defense overachieved a little bit under Bill Belichick in 2023. Last year, regressed even more without Belichick. And as bad as the offensive line was and the pass catchers, like, the defense was almost as bad. So the fact that I think Carlton Davis pairing him with Christian Gonzalez can have a huge effect on this defense. And I'm with you on, Milton Williams. Is he the best pass rusher in the NFL? I don't think so. And you had to overpay for him. That's a lot of money, $26 million for Milton Williams, but he's still young, and you got better on the defensive line. Landry's an okay starter, still more work to do there. Like the secondary move, Robert Spillane, fine as a starting linebacker. Morgan Moses, the first piece, I think, of rebuilding that offensive line. It's not a long-term play, but it's at least, hey, we've got one spot down. Nwenu's probably two spots. So let's say two and a half to three more spots to take care of on the offensive line. So I think they're moving in the right direction. And when you have that much money to spend, you should be able to add at least a few impact players. And I think they did that.
But this is it's an interesting discussion for New England, because I think you're right? You can only judge the results, but the results do not necessarily indicate what they were trying to do and weren't able to get done, right? They simply indicate what they were able to get over the line. So for New England, just because they brought in a bunch of defenders, pre-free agency, or New England strategy needs to be offensive line and wide receivers, right? Basically nothing else. Forget, those are your focuses, because you have Drake May, who looks really good, and you have nothing around him. So obviously your first strategy needs to be, let's give him help on the offensive line and receiver. As you said, they were in on Chris Godwin, couldn't get it over the line. Who knows who else they were in on in those two position groups and couldn't get over the line. So on the one hand, you're sort of like, well, we shouldn't judge them harshly for not being able to get that done. On the other hand, they had the most cap space in the NFL to play with going into free agency. And Milton Williams in particular, the reports are that they gazumped Carolina because they were willing to go to a place. The report was something like they just would not be denied, right? Like Carolina thought they had a deal done. New England came back with more money and then just kept hammering until Milton Williams was like, well, I can't, decision made. Like, I can't turn down this. The Patriots are literally going to go to whatever the number is to get this deal over the line. My question would be, if they could do that for Milton Williams, why couldn't they get that done for what is a more acute need in either offensive tackle or wide receiver? Like, if that, if they were prepared to use that war chest, the salary cap space that they had to play with for the defensive tackle, why couldn't they get one of these other deals over the line by just keep going until somebody says yes?
I mean, my answer would be Milton Williams. Okay, maybe he's not Chris Jones year in, year out, but we're talking about a top 3 or 4 interior pass rusher in the NFL, or has the opportunity to be that going forward. You're comparing that to the left tackles available, to Dan Moore, to Jalen Moore, to Cam Robinson. Washington had to give up, multiple draft picks just to get creative to get a Laramie Tunsil. So if you're going to overspend, I mean, like Sam, if they were like, we won't be denied, we need Dan Moore, we're going $22 million. Sorry, Tennessee. We'd be sitting here criticizing New England for overpaying Dan Moore. That would be insane. Where they still have it pick 4. Like if they pick Will Campbell, I'm fine with Will Campbell as the pick at number 4. If they trade down and still get Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks and he's their starting left tackle, then you're one second wave left guard free agent move away from creep back toward average is in the range of possibilities here for New England's offensive line. I'm glad that they spent the money on a Milton Williams versus a Dan Moore or someone else at left tackle, or Cam Robinson.
I think there are times where the need is so acute that I'm kind of okay with an overpay. Like, this is why part of the reason I don't think the Tennessee move for Dan Moore is that good or bad is because I don't think their need was that acute that they needed to go throw the bag at Dan Moore Jr. to get it done.
It was, though, because of right tackle. Because the right tackle situation in Tennessee is as bad as New England's left tackle situation. It's just as bad.
But you needed a tackle. You didn't need, like, the Patriots need an upgrade of basically the entire offensive line. Tennessee just has a problem spot at right tackle, and we're not even sure Latham fixes it. Like, Latham's just used to play right tackle in college, so we're assuming he might be better there than he was in his first year in the NFL on the other side. Like, it's a nice fit in that it allows them to move Latham back there and theoretically upgrade both spots, but we're not sure that's going to be the case. Point being, I don't think Tennessee had this like, man, this entire unit needs to be overhauled at the risk of ruining our quarterback, which is by far the most important thing. Tennessee doesn't have a quarterback, so it doesn't matter if they ruin the guy because who cares? It's Will Levis. He's already ruined. Will Levis, in his default position, is a meme quarterback. So if we don't fix the left tackle spot and he gets murdered next year because we're like a turnstile at left tackle, who cares? It's not the guy anyway.
I mean, I think that was the right place to overpay Milton Williams. Still work to do. Still work to do on the offensive side of the ball.
But the other thing is, it also changes. Like, Cam Robinson is still available, and Cam Robinson is a perfectly serviceable left tackle, as he showed last season in Minnesota. He's not great, but he's fine, right? If they end up like today, free agency actually starts, if they end up snagging Cam Robinson for a modest deal, that's great. Like, that completely changes everything. Like, suddenly you've got your left tackle. You didn't have to overpay for Dan Moore or Jalen Moore or whoever. You end up getting a better player than probably either of those guys for whatever that sum is. And you got Milton Williams because you wouldn't be denied.
Yeah, I think left tackle and left guard still to be done. Also, a lot of rumors around Cooper Kupp potentially going to New England after he gets released officially by the Rams. I've pegged Cooper Kupp in New England as a really good fit throughout this entire process. I liked Kupp either going to Washington before the Debo deal or New England, right? You got the rookie contract quarterback. I think Kupp would be a great fit for Drake May. Still more work to do. He'd be one piece, right? So that's just where they are. They're not going to solve everything in 2 days, but I think they certainly moved in the right direction there. Anything else on the Patriots?
No, other than, still, as you say, still work to be done. They haven't really upgraded the two biggest positions of need they need.
New York Jets in the AFC East. We've got them re-signing Jamie and Sherwood, signed Brandon Stevens, a cornerback from the Ravens, and the biggest move, Justin Fields, 2 years, $40 million to play quarterback. Your thoughts on the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Justin Fields is the biggest thing here. Now, with teams, sometimes you got to focus on who left as well. Like DJ Reed leaving, now you're bringing in Brandon Stevens as potentially a replacement there. That's not great. That's a fairly significant downgrade. But the Jets conversation begins and probably ends with Justin Fields. 2 years, $40 million. As we said, that is high-end bridge money, but it's not, he's the unquestioned starter going forward for a couple of years. Nothing else is going to change that. Like, we have a starter. He's there, but we're not completely out of the quarterback market. If something happens in the draft, if the right guy falls there, you could easily draft a quarterback and he could be starting by week 6 and it wouldn't, undermine everything you've just done. So Fields to New York is an interesting guy. I mean, we talked about this on the video when it happened. I think people are too, the takes on Fields are not nuanced enough, right? It's like he's good or he's bad. Nothing.
Never have been, Sam. They've never been nuanced.
Right. And it's like, but it's more complicated than that because he's neither great or garbage. He's somewhere in the middle. Like, he's a fascinating quarterback where his athleticism is like top 3, right? Like Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Justin Fields. These are like the most athletically gifted quarterbacks in the NFL. Throw in Josh Allen if you want to talk about a slightly different type of athleticism, but like, he's in that conversation, like one of the most athletically problematic quarterbacks in football to deal with if you're a defender. There's a play out there of him making defensive player of the year, highest paid defender in football, Myles Garrett, look ridiculous on an unblocked, basically a free run right at him. Fields just goes, nope, evades Myles Garrett, gets out, turns it into a positive play. He's got that level of athleticism and athletic potential and an arm to go with it, but has not been the passer that he was supposed to be coming into the NFL. That being said, he has improved year on year, albeit incremental and from a pretty low starting point. And I do think that his biggest problem is not reading the defense from a understanding what he's seeing point of view. It's not necessarily accuracy, though he does have, more bullet passes to guys that don't need to receive bullet passes than he would like to see. I think his biggest problem is not trusting his own eyes, right? Not trusting his reads. Not that he can't process, but like looks up, sees a thing and won't pull the trigger. And I don't know if that's there have been players that have improved that, fixed that in their careers. There's also been players where that's been the reason they can't be good. So I think he's an interesting player to bring in and to roll the dice on because the athleticism is so high that you can like get him to a floor that lets you work on the other stuff during a season, right? Like you can have him starting, it's going to be viable. And then you can figure out if we can get him to have that jump as a passer. I like the gamble. Like, I think it's worth taking if you're the Jets. I also would not be, saying, right, we're done. This is quarterback set. Keep looking for the next guy because the chances are the gamble is not necessarily going to pay off.
No, I completely agree, Sam. I like what the Jets are doing because for a couple reasons. I think there was a handful of teams in the NFL going into this offseason where I said 2025 should not be the goal. And I know that's not a real conversation in buildings a lot of the time. You gotta restructure it. Say, hey, we got to think for the future. We got to think about 26. The Jets are one of those teams. I thought the Raiders, I thought the Titans. You don't need to be just going for it. You have a lot of roster to reshape here with Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Morgan Moses, just on the offensive side of the ball. You need you have to replenish the defensive line. You need a starting wide receiver. You need a starting right tackle. The needs are up and down this roster. Plus, you have Aaron Glenn coming in, whole new schemes on both sides of the ball. The whole roster needs to be reshaped, and you got to figure out, who's part of this rebuild. And I think it's okay that the Jets, they've made a couple signings. They added Andre Sisco 1 year, at safety as well. Fill a couple of those starting spots. Ideally, have guys that are going to be a part of multi-year deals that are going to be a part of the rebuild going forward. And Justin Fields, I think, is a perfect, still theoretical, high upside guy that you laid out, high upside shot at quarterback that doesn't keep you from drafting a guy at 7, doesn't keep you from drafting a guy in the second round. And I think you have to draft a quarterback, to be honest. I think you have to bring somebody in. You're not just saying, well, it's Fields or bust. It's Fields and Tyrod Taylor next year. I think you have to draft one of those QBs in this draft, but get somebody in there and start thinking to 2026. And I think these Jets moves, locking up Jamie Sherwood, who has really progressed into one of the better linebackers in the NFL. I thought those were all good moves for the Jets because they're more long-term plays.
Yeah. Again, I would just say the analysis on Fields should be more nuanced than it is. Even if you just use like blunt, surface level statistics to look at where he is. Like his passer rating last year, it's gotten better pretty much every year of his career. It's gone from low 70s, which is bad, to last year it was like 93, right? 93 puts him in the Bo Nix, Geno Smith, Jordan Love kind of range. Obviously, again, passer rating, wildly flawed stat, but it blunt tool, it puts you in a vague direction. 5
perspective. Yeah.
Right. 5 passing touchdowns, 1 interception, 6.8 yards per attempt is in the Bo Nix category as well. Like it's viable, right? It's like it's right somewhere in the middle in the NFL right now. And that's the thing he's worst at, right? The passing, the general passing stuff. Now, is it also true that once Russell Wilson came into the lineup, like Pittsburgh's offense notably ticked up, right? He unlocked some elements of that offense. I think also entirely accurate, right? So this is the thing. Like he's viable. He's not, he's sort of middle of the road, somewhere in the average category of a passer with spectacular athleticism. But the flaws so far mean that a guy like Russell Wilson, who's willing to just air it out and trust what he sees and chuck the ball in the vague direction of George Pickens, will improve the offense. So that's why he's getting this sort of $20 million a year hedge deal rather than, of course, we're going to bring him in as a start. Like that's why he's getting this deal as opposed to the Sam Darnold deal, because we still don't know if he can be better than he is right now.
Yeah, and just to repeat that, make no mistake, it's a high-end bridge deal, right? It isn't Justin Fields is our guy going forward. He's not the starter. It's him and Daniel Jones are in this similar boat of bridge quarterback with, pretty big inflation over the last couple of years. But the last thing I'll repeat is, given the options, I think the Jets did well to bring in Justin Fields as an upside play, because to me, it's the Jets. All of their moves are about 2026 and beyond, not 2025. The draft is obviously going to be huge for them, it is for everyone, but they need a receiver, a tackle, defensive line depth. They need a lot in reshaping this thing, and I think Fields is a good guy to kind of either bridge them to the next, era here, or maybe they do unlock him and he's the next Geno Baker, that the guy that a lot of teams are searching for. Can we get the most out of this guy that's talented?
It's a little bit like Pittsburgh last year, right? If you don't like this move, if you're like, nah, Fields isn't the guy, he's terrible, he sucks, I don't like him, this is a bad move by the Jets. Well, then the obvious question follow-up is, well, okay, what would you have done, right? Clearly, the Rodgers thing was a failure. You're not bringing him back. Sam Darnold was the kind of prize of the veteran free agent market. Sam Darnold was never going to the Jets based off Sam Darnold already playing for the Jets. So that was never really an option. Where else are you going for quarterback if you're the Jets? They're not in a position where you can guarantee one of the top 2 guys in this draft unless you trade aggressively up to go do that. Even if you do that, you've got to beat the trade offer from the Giants or whoever else is potentially trading up to make that happen. Would they have done the Raiders trade and traded a third for Geno Smith and then paid him the contract that he's going to want? And you don't have the advantage of the connection with Pete Carroll there. Like, you've got to do that on its own merits and hope Geno's okay with that. Like, my answer would be, if you don't like Fields, like, what was the better option on the table?
Well, just to wrap this up, though, the Jets are also stuck with this idea that if Geno Smith, let's call him available, and Sam Darnold was the most available, those are also guys who, quote, failed in New York previously. So right. Whether they've changed as players or not over the last 10 years for Geno or 4 or 5 years for Sam Darnold, that's still in the back of your mind. Did they fail because of it was New York? Was it us? So they can't go after two of the most coveted quarterbacks during this cycle, Geno Smith and Sam Darnold. So yeah, this was the best option that they had. And now again, I think they have to draft somebody. It doesn't have to be at 7. I think they should draft somebody as well.
And, the other option would be Russell Wilson. And to be honest, I think that, let's say they could sign him to the exact same contract. And I know no indication that that's true, but I would take the gamble on the young upside of Justin Fields over a 36-year-old version of Russell Wilson, even having seen Wilson effectively outplaying Fields in the same offense a year ago. I still think going forward, that's the better gamble to take.
Let's wrap up the AFC East going with the Miami Dolphins here. Not a bunch of splashy moves. I don't think we were expecting that from Miami, but bringing in James Daniels, really like that. The starting guard, potential starting guard when he's healthy. Also still young, second time he's hit free agency in his 20s. I like that as a move. Zach Wilson comes in as the backup. Always a fan. If I'm a fan of Justin Fields on a buy low, I'm a fan of Zach Wilson on a buy low at this point, just, to see what happens. Just 1 year, $6 million. Afatu Melifonwu comes in at safety from the Lions. They re-signed Tyrell Dodson to come back to play linebacker, brought in Ashton Davis to play safety, and then Nick Westbrook-Akina, the wide receiver from the Tennessee Titans, coming off the high touchdown season last year, kind of like that as a wide receiver 3, with him complementing Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, very different wide receiver from those guys. So that, I think, in and of itself is a potential positive thing for them. Yeah, like it's a relatively quiet offseason from Miami, which I think was probably expected. James Daniels, I think, has the potential to be a really nice move for them. Now, he's injury issues, so with almost all these offensive linemen this offseason, like there's some, real risk attached to that. He's not just a guaranteed upgrade, but that's a weak offensive line in a lot of places and was a problem last year. James Daniels could absolutely upgrade that for very modest money if they're able to get him healthy and get him firing. So I think that's the potential to be a really nice move. You love the kick the tires deal on Zach Wilson. I mean, okay, I expect that to do an awful lot for them, but okay. It is interesting putting him, in this world of reclamation projects. Like, Mike McDaniel is supposed to be an offensive mind, right? It's now Mike McDaniel and Bobby Slowick. Like, what can they get out of Zach Wilson if they need to turn to him, with Tua's history of concussions? And, if they do need a backup quarterback and they need Zach Wilson to play games, what can they get out of it?
Yeah, like I'm not saying the Dolphins are winning the Super Bowl because of Zach Wilson, but we've seen Tua hurt, various points in his career. We might get to see Zach Wilson, and he's, by the way, the NFL didn't just invent chasing after failed first round prospects, hoping that they get the most out of them. We've just recently seen more success from Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, who was a second rounder, after years of never seeing that. So it's not like this new trend of, oh man, got to kick the tires on the former first rounder. This always happens. But we've just seen it come good over the last few years, and it happens to come good with former Jets. So Zach Wilson for 1 year, $6 million. Yeah, why not? I think when we were breaking down Miami coming into this offseason, we said there's a lot of holes on both sides of the ball. The defensive line, defensive tackle needs a ton of depth. Offensive line needs a ton of depth. They made that one step with James Daniels. I think there's still more to do there. Like other teams, left guard, they probably need someone. Continue to need depth and insurance up and down that line just for injury issues. Teron Armstead all the time. But defensively, they just went for it so much over the last couple of years with Tyreek Hill, with Jalen Ramsey. They made a lot of those big moves and then had to pay Tua. Now, this isn't like the credit card coming due type of thing like some other teams. It's more the aggressive moves where they were depleted from in draft capital for a few years. That's the team building part that's coming due. So I know the draft is important for everybody, but it's like more acute for some than others. So they need some draft contributors immediately, defensive line, secondary depth. They need a bunch. But I think these are some, okay moves that are moving things in the right direction. And again, I would still try to grab another offensive lineman and a little bit more depth before you get into the draft.
Yeah, they're just in a tough spot because nobody's more squeezed for cap space than the Miami Dolphins are. They don't have the money to screw around in free agency. They can pick little small deals here or there, but this is not a team. They're a team that's put themselves in a position where, look, they have a ton of draft picks. That's good, but they actually need to have a really good draft with those draft picks. So, this was always going to be, I think, a quiet offseason for them in terms of veteran spending. It's all going to be focused on having a great draft.
Yeah, really is. They get the 13th pick, 3 in the top 100, 5 in the top 135. So I'm interested to see where they go there. I think defensive tackle absolutely in play for them up and down the draft in Miami. We're going to spend more time on some teams than others because not every team's made a ton of moves that are worth reacting to. Let's go to the AFC North. Cleveland Browns are up next. And I think the biggest thing they did was pay Myles Garrett. We haven't even discussed Myles Garrett a whole lot. Right. $40 million guy. Everything else was, Kenny Pickett trade, bringing him in for a fifth, basically trading Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Cornelius Lucas, he's like Morgan Moses light for me, Sam. You always bring in Cornelius Lucas. This was my Ty and Secchi a couple of years ago, right? When you have a swing tackle that can step in and start at both spots, which is rare, you bring that guy in for 2 years, $10 million. So great move by the Browns bringing in Cornelius Lucas.
Great
move. Yeah, great move relative to the money. And then Joe Tryon-Shank, former first rounder, comes in off the edge.
Yeah, I mean, Tryon-Shank is the kind of guy, he's got the athleticism that could have a ton of cleanup plays from Myles Garrett pressures. I kind of like that as even if he's not going to get much better, never going to sort of put it together as a former first round pick. That style of player, I think, has the potential to have way more success playing with a Myles Garrett than he did elsewhere. So I kind of like that for that reason alone. The Myles Garrett move itself, I mean, it kind of went, this is what I thought would happen, right? I want out is just, it might as well be for that read. I want more money, right? And if I get out, that will give me more money somewhere else. But ultimately there's a dollar figure where that becomes that just goes away, right? Like there's all these memes of, hey, I want out, I want to win. It's not about the money. And then, okay, but is it about the money if we give you $40 million a year?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Then yes, it is. So, this was always about, will the Browns simply go to a dollar figure that makes Myles Garrett forget about wanting to win? And the answer is yes. They were. They make him the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, and that seems fair. Myles Garrett is one of those, 3, 4, 5 players that has a strong case to be the best non-quarterback in the NFL. So he deserves that kind of contract. So that makes sense for Cleveland. Like it would have been like a total rebuild, tear down, strip this whole thing back if they're trading away Myles Garrett. Like he's the best player they have. He's one of the best things they have going for them. If they exceeded, to his demands, they would have been like, this is it. Everything's gone, like fire sale. Instead, they're like, no, he's our best player. We want to keep him, give him that kind of contract. But it's all conditioned by this Deshaun Watson deal still on the books, and now they're still trying to figure out what the quarterback situation is.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously going to be the biggest question for the Browns. I'm glad they got the Myles Garrett thing done, and it's kind of like you pay the quarterback, and then you kind of know what the finances look like going forward, and you can make your decisions around that. You've got Myles Garrett locked up. You at least have that elite pass rusher for the next few years, and now how do you make your decisions around that? I mean, we've complimented the Browns for their team building efforts in previous years just because they had a stretch where they had one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Well, all those guys are getting a little bit older, heading into the last year of deals, had some injuries last year, but Jack Conklin, Wyatt Teller, Joel Bitonio, they were so good for so long. That's kind of seeing some cracks on the offensive line. Could still use more as far as playmakers go, compliments for Jerry Jeudy. And then defensively, they regressed a little bit last year, which, could have been expected. Just been an inconsistent defense over the last couple of years, not as effective rushing the passer next to Myles Garrett. So I think there's still more work to do for the Browns. But yeah, the Deshaun Watson contract ends up being such a hindrance for them right now. And they still have to figure out who they actually want to play quarterback, because they could, I don't even know when Watson recovers from the second Achilles injury, if they literally never want him to take a snap, if he's going to play halfway through the season when he comes back, or if they're going to draft somebody. There's still a lot up in the air. I don't think the Kenny Pickett move was telling. I don't think he's the backup option, like the backup starting option, that they're just not going to draft a QB now. I think they just kind of like Kenny Pickett better than DTR as a backup, so they made the move.
I think at this point you have to assume that you have to treat Deshaun Watson like, dead cap space. Deshaun Watson is a dead roster spot, right? He's never going to play again for the Cleveland Browns, in my opinion. He, even independent of the Achilles injuries, he was playing so bad that they were going to have to bench him, even though they're stuck with that giant contract, and the fact that, he is the most prohibitive, like the most secure player in football, and that they have the giant roster, or the giant contract that's fully guaranteed, and they traded everything that they traded to get him, like the sunk cost of all those draft picks and the sunk cost of the PR nightmare that went along with that. Like, he was the most untouchable player in the NFL, and yet he was playing so badly that they were going to have to bench him. So it doesn't even matter that he tore his Achilles and then tore it again. I think you just have to assume he will never play for this team again. He's a dead roster spot that they have to carry, and his contract is a huge millstone around the neck of this team, but he's not a factor, in my opinion, when you're talking about the quarterback situation for the Browns, other than the fact that they're stuck with him, right? So for all intents and purposes, they don't have a quarterback, which is why they go and add, Kenny Pickett to the roster, because DTR had shown that he probably wasn't capable of starting either. So they basically have their quarterback depth chart right now reads Kenny Pickett, Bailey Zappi. The end.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Pickett move is him as a backup. I kind of agree with you. I think Watson's probably done regardless, and they're just going to eat it. And then we'll just see what they do in the draft. If they like a Shedeur Sanders enough, if they want to trade back into the first and get a Jackson Dart, or if they want to just wait, get somebody in the second or third, it's where they are. But I don't mind some of the other moves. The Cornelius Lucas one, really good offensive line depth, but Browns can't really do a whole lot right now. Let's go Cincinnati Bengals. Franchise tag on T. Higgins. And, look, they're sitting here watching all this money getting thrown around, and they're going to have to pay Jamar Chase, still figure out what's going on with T. Higgins, and you still have Trey Hendrickson legitimately, I think, asking for a trade. Or more money, as you said. But the price tag's going up for all of them by the day, essentially. So all the other moves that they've made, BJ Hill coming back at defensive tackle for 3 years, $33 million. Mike Gesicki coming back 3 years, $25 million. Those are all fine moves. TJ Slayton comes in because he's 330 pounds and they need a run-stopping nose tackle. Talk about that in a minute. Joseph Asai comes back. They needed edge depth with Asai, Miles Murphy, see what happens with Hendrickson. Like, these are all fine moves, but for Bengals fans, it's the big ones that they're waiting on.
Yeah, they have a weird offseason because their offseason is all about what do they do with their own players. Like, it's and it unusually so. You can say this with Baltimore as well, where the Ravens offseason is like one of the biggest things they did was retain Ronnie Stanley. But he was about to hit the open market. Where the Bengals are weird is that they've got all these guys under contract, but all of them want new deals. And they're not, like, they haven't gotten any of them over the line yet. So this is this weird spot where they actually, theoretically, they don't need to sign any of these guys, right? They have them all under contract for the 2025 season in varying different ways. And the only question is, can they get an extension done with these guys? Like, obviously, Jamar Chase, it's just sort of due his next, the big contract, right? So his time has come. T. Higgins, they've done this, what are we going to do with him? Franchise tag him last year, franchise tag him again this year. And then Trey Hendrickson just wanting an extension because he's reaching the end of that money. But unlike a team like the Ravens, all of those guys theoretically are on the roster next year. What makes Cincinnati unusually, they're unusual in a couple of ways. Number one, they don't like to give out guarantees beyond 1 year, right? I would say they don't do it at all, but they did it for Joe Burrow. So they've already broken that precedent once in recent years, but generally they don't like doing that. And that becomes a problem when you're, 3 of your top 5 best players are all looking for big money extensions. There's a lot of talk that Mike Brown is a cash poor owner because he's like a legacy nepotism owner, effectively, right? His dad formed the franchise, right? So he's definitely one of the poorer NFL owners, right? He's not the Waltons. He's not, those like legitimate high-end billionaires, David Tepper, et cetera. He does, however, have access to the kind of money it requires to put this into place, right? They could sign all 3 of those guys, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson, to whatever contract they want, and Mike Brown can find that money to put in escrow. That's not the holdup here. When you own an NFL franchise, you have access to the kind of funding that's required to do that without selling like 5% of the team. You just have access to that kind of investment, and these things print money. By that, I mean NFL franchises. The second holdup is that the Bengals, not holdup, but the second unusual element about Cincinnati is they are a team that has been willing to go to play chicken with players and just call their bluff, right? Other teams, it's like, this guy wants out, the iron trade demand, right? And they're like, yeah, but oh man, we don't want to give him the money, but we can't, like, he'll cause problems, he'll sit out, and we got to get, and so you cave, right? And you give him the deal or you trade him away or whatever it is. The Bengals have been generally willing to go, yeah, but you're under contract. So what are you going to do? Are you actually going to sit out and cost yourself all of this money? Like, all right, I don't think you'll do that. Give it a shot, right? So in this world where Trey Hendrickson in particular, they've got T. Higgins, he's under the franchise tag. Like, he's not going to sit out for a franchise tag. Jamar Chase, I think they'll find a way of getting that deal done, whatever. But Hendrickson in particular, like, I don't think they're going to trade him just because he wants more money and wants to be traded. Like, if they don't want to give him that contract, I think they will call his bluff and say, play out the year or sit out and cost yourself all the money.
So that's the offseason in a nutshell, Sam. I mean, that's what we're waiting on. Those are the shoes that need to drop. And then even if let's say it all goes great, Hendrickson plays, T. Higgins plays, Jamar Chase plays and is fine, and they figure out all the contract stuff whenever they do, whatever their timing is, still need to improve their pass rush, even if Hendrickson's back. They brought in Slayton, who I mentioned, because they're just yearning for to stop the run a little bit better at defensive tackle. I'm not sure Slayton's the guy. He's interesting. I mean, say what you want about PFF grades. I'll just read them to you. Do what you want with it. 43 overall PFF grade last year. He's a 330-pound run-stopping nose tackle with a run defense grade of 44 last year. 59 the previous year, 62 the previous year, and 44 as a rookie. I think Slayton's one of those guys. I mean, we've watched a lot of film through the years, Sam. You could pull out enough good plays that say, hey, this is the guy we need in the middle of the defense. You could pull up enough bad plays where it's like, this guy's out of it. He does blow up the line of scrimmage quite a bit when teams run downhill against him, but when they run wide, he gets hooked, he gets knocked out of the play way more than you would like for a nose tackle. So do what you want with that, but they've been trying to figure out the 330-pounder. McKinley Jackson last year in the 3rd round. Again, not a very productive player that needs to develop. They're doing the same thing with Slayton. So they're taking these shots on interior defensive linemen to try to shore up their run defense. Still need probably an interior penetrator in the draft as well. And then the offensive line. They bring back Cody Ford, but I don't think you want him starting at guard. And I think both guard positions. They are in on Tevin Jenkins, I believe. And that's one of my favorite guard options. And if they did bring in Tevin Jenkins with second wave guard money, I think that'd be a great move in the right direction. But like other teams, more work to do for the Bengals. A lot of it is re-signing their own, but some of those periphery deals, I think they need a few more to round out this roster.
Yeah, but I also think that offensive line probably isn't as bad as it looked last year. I know it's changed a little bit personnel-wise. Alex Kappa's gone, et cetera. But like that group hit the low end of range of outcomes almost across the board a year ago. Amarius Mims was a rookie as well. He's very low on experience between college and the NFL. So, if we project a little bit of growth for him, but I think like Orlando Brown played about as bad as he's ever played. Volson, Karras, like these are guys that all played worse than you would typically expect from them. I think the Bengals offensive line had the season that Buffalo's had a couple of years ago, where it's like, this is a group that's sort of calibrated to be average. And sometimes those guys all hit below average in the same time. And suddenly that turns the line into a total mess. I'm all for upgrading it on the cheap, but I would expect this line to get better even if they did nothing to it.
I don't know if I have the same confidence as you. I think both. I think they still need 2 starting guards with some of the turnover there, and just Volson's always struggled at left guard. So I think they still need 2 starters and then I think both tackles could get better, and all that added up looks much better next season. Let's go Pittsburgh Steelers. The big move was DK Metcalf. We already talked about the move itself. Not much else. Donald Parham, man, do they have the biggest tight ends in the NFL? Darnell Washington, Donald Parham.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes, the end.
Also, and then Malik Harrison at linebacker. Obviously, DK is the big one. And then the shoe that needs to drop is Aaron Rodgers, who is not officially released yet as of record time, but, mulling his decisions between the Steelers and the Giants.
And the Steelers are giving him space. Just,
that's great.
Just think about it, Aaron.
I mean, I don't want to talk about Rodgers anymore, but is he that worth it that you're just going to sit here and be like, take your time, man? Don't worry about it. Nothing
they're
else,
in the position.
Nothing else going on.
But they're kind of where the Jets were, right? It's like if you don't. So the reports like a week ago were they had zeroed in on Justin Fields as the guy they wanted to bring back, right? And apparently that was kind of Fields basically just decided it was a better gig with the Jets. Maybe they were offering more money, whatever it is. But he went there instead. So now the Steelers are sort of back with they're the team where the music stopped and they might not have a chair. Like, what are they going to do at quarterback? Now, can you go sort of back cap in hand to Russell Wilson and be like, hey, I know we kind of tried to get Justin Fields back out of the 2 of you, but would you consider it? And look, it's not like he has other offers necessarily like breaking down his door. So maybe it's just like two lonely, jilted people meeting, coming back to each other after it all. Be like, well, let's try and make this work again. If they can, like, what is their plan? Like they're in trouble for a quarterback now.
Jackson Dart at 21. I think they need to draft somebody no matter what. I mean, this is the thing. Like when Big Ben retired and you drafted Kenny Pickett, and I think fans tend to look at quarterbacks who didn't work out and you just say, ha, you idiots, you missed on that guy. It's like, again, show me the alternative. Show me the better plan. Because if you're going to laugh at missing on Kenny Pickett, are you also going to laugh at bringing in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields and getting to the playoffs and having no chance to beat teams like the Ravens or Bills? Are you going to laugh at both of those options? That you don't have great options. So the Steelers, I think this year is a hybrid of both. You take a shot on Rodgers. If he says yes, great. You still drafted a quarterback no matter what. You have to still look for the next guy if you're Pittsburgh.
You do, but their problem is that's how you got Kenny Pickett in the first place. And I think it's starting. I mean, who knows? But I would say it's a fairly defendable position to suggest that Kenny Pickett was overdrafted by a round, at least in that draft, right? And they took him where they took him because they needed a quarterback and they just had to take one in the draft. And you just overdrafted a guy that never really had a shot of being that guy. Now, I don't know that that's the case this year. Like Jackson Dart, a lot of people like him, and there are some people putting him in the first round. They're also, I mean, where is he on the consensus board? It's not first round yet. So and they don't have, like, their next pick is 83. So if they're taking him, they got to take him in the first round. So you're now back to, are we overdrafting the quarterback by a round because we need a quarterback? And that's just not sound process.
They did put himself into a predicament trading for DK, which was, again, we liked that move. We like DK right. Metcalf, and maybe that says they're only going to grab a third rounder later quarterback, which is fine. I think they need to do that regardless.
Or
because
maybe you can
Rodgers
execute
isn't
a trade
the
down.
Long-term plan.
Yeah, or maybe you can execute a trade down where you get out of 21, move back to 35 or whatever, and you can snag Jackson Dart there. But that's the gamble of, if you've identified the QB you want, now you've got to play roulette, right? Do we get this guy if we keep trading back? Like that's why that was the Kenny Pickett thing, right? You probably could have traded back several times from that spot and still gotten Kenny Pickett. But can you take that risk if you need a quarterback?
Producer Ben suggests a trade for Anthony Richardson, which we'd said yesterday. I felt like the Jets were the only team that it kind of made sense. Whereas the Steelers, I think the Steelers still want a plug and play guy. The more I think of it, though, I don't mind him as hey, we're looking for the next quarterback. Can you get the most out of Anthony Richardson? Why not? Get Richardson and Rodgers in the building.
I mean,
all right, I got no more use for the Steelers discussion.
Will they also become like, if they get that desperate, are they the team? You keep making this argument. Jameis Winston is one of the top 32 quarterbacks in the NFL, right? Are they the team that's like, we're desperate enough to turn the keys over to Jameis and hope that works for a season? Like that they get them, they end up in that kind of world. If Rodgers says no, if they don't want to do the same thing they did with Kenny Pickett and draft a QB at 21, knowing that he's probably not worth that spot. Like, do they just scramble for the next gamble, veteran, reclamation, whatever, just the roller coaster that is Jameis, that is Carson Wentz, that is any of these guys where you're like, the chances of this working are pretty slim. We are, however, in that situation now.
He beat them in the Winter Wonderland game. I think isn't Tomlin more than most the guy that is willing to sign people that played well against them? Isn't he that guy? Like, man, we couldn't beat Jameis Winston, so can't beat him, join him. Let's go Baltimore Ravens. Ben was excited that they did something, so we had something for the graphic, which was signing DeAndre Hopkins. They did re-sign Ronnie Stanley as well, which again looks like quite a bargain. 3 years, $60 million, given some of the other left tackle money being thrown out there. But classic Ravens, they're sitting here accumulating some comp picks and just picking up DeAndre Hopkins for 1 year, $5 million. And if you told me this a year ago, I'd say absolutely. But, he didn't look like the same player last year. And we know that receivers age quickly. But, man, for 1 year, $5 million, awesome. Go for it.
Yeah, it's worth the gamble. It's worth the roll of the dice at that point, definitely. Particularly for a team that, they have some weaknesses at receiver still. Nuke Hopkins, even if he's diminished to a kind of possession role, still fits within that offense. Like it is a skill set that they could use. So, yeah, all for that. Ronnie Stanley is obviously the big move. He would have been the best left tackle in the market by a considerable margin. It would have left a fairly gaping hole on that offensive line for Baltimore. So retaining him and getting him, retaining him, number one, good. Retaining him for less money than Dan Moore Jr. got on the open market, huge. That's that. I think, again, it's not apples to apples. There's always differences, but that I think really shows you the power of getting a guy signed before the open market. Like, get him locked up before they get available, and suddenly the bidding war happens, and it's cheaper.
There's still rumors about a Mark Andrews trade potentially. I don't know if that's still valid or not as he heads into the last year of his deal. The Ravens have up to 11 picks right now, including 4 comp picks, if this is all updated in PFF's mock draft simulator. So you're not seeing a lot of moves by the Ravens because they don't make a ton of big-time moves during free agency, but they have the 11 draft picks. Could see them. I think they want to add another corner. Brandon Stevens out. They do need a starter there. Add more pass rushers. I think it's a good draft for them to fill some of those needs, especially late first. I love that corner edge value there. So I think we'll see some defensive linemen. We'll see a corner, maybe some offensive line depth with all those draft picks. I think Ravens fans are gonna feel good about a lot of the same players coming back, running it back, and then an influx of youth this offseason.
Yeah, they got 4 comp picks, I think, from that.
Officially yesterday, right?
Yesterday.
4 comp picks, yeah. And that was why last year they went in to the offseason, or they went into the draft with a need at right tackle and questions at right guard, and they solved them enough, right? They got through. Obviously, they had one of the best offenses in the NFL. So, yeah, I think they're in really good position once again because Baltimore does a nice job from a team-building perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go AFC South. Tennessee Titans, mentioned the big one was Dan Moore Jr. They also bring in Cody Barton at linebacker, Xavier Woods at safety. They were in on, I think, Javon Holland and some of the other high-end safeties. End up going with second-tier safety and Xavier Woods. And I think perhaps most notable for the Titans is no big move at at quarterback, right? There was enough of a question. Would they make a move for Sam Darnold, or would they be in on whoever at quarterback enough that said, hey, maybe they're not drafting Cam Ward, but I think with no big quarterback moves, we're seeing Cam Ward at number 1 overall for the Titans.
Well, yeah, they're either taking Cam Ward number 1 or they are punting on the season at quarterback, right? And, throwing Will Levis out there for another year, knowing that like it's a write-off season and next year we go get the quarterback. But yeah, I think the most likely thing is Cam Ward at number 1, which again, like when they were making all those noises about, we're not going to pass up a blue chip player at the top of this draft, like it was the language of that was pointed in that it never precluded them taking Cam Ward at the top of the draft. It simply meant that if and when they did it, they were already like labeling him as a blue chip prospect. But that spent like that caused 2 weeks of people putting Abdul Carter number 1 on mock drafts.
But it was GM speak. It was coach speak. It was just, we're not going to pass up a blue chip. You could say that every single year.
Right.
And it's going to drum up interest. It's going to get you. Is it like Travis Hunter? Is it Abdul Carter? Does that mean they don't love the quarterback? Do they think Cam Ward's a blue chip? It's just GM speak. And I still believe if the Giants gave them an offer that they can't refuse, if the Giants, here's what I think Tennessee's rooting for, though. Depending on how much, if they don't love Cam Ward, here's what they're rooting for. Aaron Rodgers goes to the Steelers. Giants might settle for Russell Wilson. They're going to feel more desperate. They want to come up and get Cam Ward, and they send an absolute haul to the Titans. And I think that even if they do like Cam Ward, I think they might want to consider that. So I think that might be what the Titans are rooting for here in the next 3 to 4 months before Aaron Rodgers makes his decision.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's always a trade that's so big that you basically have to take it and play the percentages that you can get the guy next year and, do it that way. But I think the most likely thing for them has always been to just pick Cam Ward number 1 in the draft. I just find it funny that like he says one thing that doesn't actually say anything, but that caused 2 weeks of mock drafts of people putting anybody other than Cam Ward number 1 overall. When really like it's just, as you said, you could say that any given year as just a regular axiom of drafting, and it would be the same thing.
Anything else on the Titans? We talked about Dan Moore quite a bit already. He's a new starting left tackle. They'll move J.C. Latham to right tackle. I think they're at least moving in the right direction there, even if the money's not, where you would want it for Dan Moore at left tackle.
Yeah, it's an overpay. He's going to get wrecked this year when he plays Myles Garrett. That's an unfortunate coincidental timing for Dan. But outside of playing Myles Garrett, he's been a serviceable left tackle, like average, pretty much bang average, as long as he doesn't have to play Myles Garrett. And that is an upgrade over what they've had, but that's a lot of money for average.
All right, let's go Jacksonville Jaguars. They've made a ton of moves here. Biggest one, Jordan Lewis coming in, cornerback from the Dallas Cowboys, 3 years, $30 million. You have Patrick McCarry, former Ravens offensive lineman, coming in for 3 years, $37.5 million. Robert Hainsey coming in, perhaps to play center, probably to play center here, 3 years, $21 million. De'Ami Brown for 1 year, $10 million. Safety Eric Murray for 3 years. And then some other residual backup type of moves at tight end. Nick Mullins, a backup QB, Chuma Edoga at backup tackle. So a lot of moves for the Jags. Nothing real splashy, but, second-tier free agents making $7 to $10 million a year for the Jags.
Yeah, a lot of kind of middle-class roster moves for them. Patrick McCarry is one of those.
Really quick, sorry. In the splash moves of a couple of years ago, Christian Kirk being traded to the Texans, Evan Ingram being released, some of the bigger moves from the previous regime essentially, running their course.
Yeah. Patrick McCarry is one of those offensive linemen that I would love every free agent period. He's like the interior version, not even the interior. He's just a versatile version, a more versatile version than your Morgan Moses's, of just like bring that guy in anytime he's available. He can play most of the spots on your offensive line, maybe all 5 if you need him to. I think he could start in several of them and be a perfectly, useful part of your starting 5. And he gives you that versatility that very few offensive linemen have, where you can, ride injuries because of McCarry. So 3 years, $37.5 million for him. I'm all for that. The other moves, the secondary moves, Jordan Lewis, Eric Murray, They're fine. I think the Lewis one's a little bit rich for my liking, but okay, it's cool. It's fine. Hainsey, I think, is a nice move. Again, that offensive line needed some work as well. And then De'Ami Brown is coming off, a pretty nice year for Washington. It's ironic that like the one guy that couldn't seem to unlock De'Ami Brown was his college quarterback, Sam Howell. Like it's anybody other than Sam Howell thrown to De'Ami Brown seems to be able to unlock potential there. And then Howell never seemed to be able to connect with him.
Yeah, I'm going to throw the Hainsey move in there just to discuss that as well. Mitch Morse retired at center, so Hainsey comes in, probably plays center. Makari could play guard. I think they needed to improve on the interior. Hainsey's okay. He's been an okay starter for the Bucs when he wasn't hurt. So I don't know that they're done on the offensive line. And what you mentioned with De'Ami Brown, remember last year at this time, we said, okay, they have Gabe Davis. Then they drafted Brian Thomas Jr. We're like, boom, those guys are vertical threats. Well, that's what De'Ami Brown is as well. And you just lost like the one guy that Trevor Lawrence would throw short to is Evan Ingram. And now he's gone. So I am interested to see who the possession type of receiver is for this team, because now you have Gabe Davis, De'Ami Brown, and Brian Thomas Jr., who are all, vertical type threats. And Brian Thomas Jr. is more than that, right? We miscast him maybe as just a vertical threat. And by the end of the season, you're like, this dude's all around. He can do it all.
So much more.
Yeah. Parker Washington maybe steps into that possession type role, or they're still looking elsewhere. So, yeah, like, again, nothing that jumps off the page other than I think reshuffling the deck a little bit on the offensive line, adding a needed starter in the secondary, even though Jordan Lewis, he could be a little up and down. We'll see what happens with him playing outside, if they're expecting him to play outside opposite Tyson Campbell. And so, yeah, it's fine. I think more defensive line depth for them as well in the draft. I'm going to be going forward. We've talked about Trayvon Walker a ton. I'm going to be interested to see what they think of Trayvon Walker, what they think of some of the previous draft picks, if they do start to lock up, Devin Lloyd and some of those types of players that, from the previous regime going forward.
Yeah, that will be the really interesting element of this switch from Trent Baalke to the new regime. It's not so much like the moves that they're making right now, because I actually think overall it's not a terrible roster personnel wise. Like there's a reasonable amount of talent here, but it will be interesting to see how they start to behave towards the old regime's moves. Because again, it's not that Trayvon Walker is a terrible player. It's just that he had never had any business being drafted number 1 overall, right? So if you forget that, like it's a sunk cost of a mistake, it's whatever. But you have just what you have in Trayvon Walker now. It's not that he doesn't belong on the team or doesn't belong starting, but he's just not the impact player that you would have hoped or wanted if you were going to draft him number 1 overall. So how do they react to that? Like what does that get as the next contract?
I mean, it's kind of like the Chase Young thing. I mean, we had high expectations for Chase Young, but it's just, I don't know, if he makes Chase Young money, do you feel good about that? If he makes $15 million a year, or to be a durable, getting better edge rusher, and they don't have to make this decision yet.
Right.
But if he's making that kind of money, maybe that's fine. If he wants $25 million because I'm a former first round pick that gets 8 to 10 sacks every year, yeah, I'm saying see you later. So I am interested to see what the new regime looks at as far as the Jags defensive line in particular.
Yeah, like if he wants the sort of the Josh Hines Allen contract adjusted for inflation, I would absolutely walk away from that immediately.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have Travis Etienne. You've got some decisions to make on, again, previous regimes, some of their picks here. I have no other strong takes on the Jags other than they need to draft well as well. Indianapolis Colts are up next. They haven't made a ton of moves, but they're all somewhat splashy. Daniel Jones for 1 year, $14 million to come in and compete with Anthony Richardson. And then 2 big moves in the secondary. Cam Bynum for 4 years, $60 million. Travarius Ward, 3 years, up to $60 million. So Ward comes in to play corner. Cam Bynum playing safety. I think those are much needed secondary upgrades for the Colts. And then, of course, the Daniel Jones discussion that we had the other day coming in to legitimately compete with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, so I really like the Daniel Jones move. I think that's the right quarterback to add to this as competition. I think he fits within that offense. They don't need to change anything. I think it is legitimate competition. And as we said when it happened, this is maybe the best supporting cast that Daniel Jones has ever had. So you're potentially getting the best version of Daniel Jones that the league has seen as well. Shane Steichen is a good offensive coach. So I think that's a great move for them. It's not a ton of money. I think it's a great move for Daniel Jones because it's the place that he most likely has a chance of starting. And I mean, if he has, the Darnold season is an outlier, right? But if he's able to come in, play well, impress them, he could win that job going forward. You know what I mean? Not just win it for this year, but actually win a starting gig going forward. I think that would have been much more hard to do in Minnesota, even if he'd have had a chance of starting. The chance of him winning that job going forward, I think, would have been pretty small. So it's a great move for them. I really like Charvarius Ward at corner for them. I think that's a great move. Cameron Bynum, I think, is a good player. I think that feels rich, and particularly in this offseason where safeties are there's a ton of, I think, pretty capable starting safeties out there. So I feel like that was quite a lot of money for him. I might have pivoted to another name if that was the price tag, but it still should be a good deal for them.
I wonder how much Lou Anarumo comes in as defensive coordinator, and it feels like Lou's stock as defensive coordinator came and went with their safeties. With when he had Jesse Bates, it felt good. When they tried to draft and develop younger safeties, it did not go so well. So much so that they're trying to bring in, old man Von Bell last year to just solve things. So I wonder how much just having a veteran safety was a big part of that decision for the Colts there. But yeah, I thought I like those moves in the secondary. Again, the one interesting thing, they're losing 2 starters, Will Fries, and I apologize for calling him Freeze. It is Fries. It is legit to have fries with that. Will Fries out, Ryan Kelly out, Tanner Bordellini, they drafted last year as a developmental center. I think he could step in. Right guard, still a question mark. So it's not the same, I think, top 3 to 5 offensive line that they've trotted out there the last couple of years. So still some things to work out there on the offensive line.
Yeah, losing 2 capable starters is definitely noteworthy, definitely worth putting out there. I think they should have the personnel to be able to not necessarily seamless transition. I suspect there will be downgrades, but to at least, not have it be a problem, right? I don't think they're opening up 2 spots in the offensive line where you're like, we need to go fix this quickly. Theoretically, they have the personnel there, I think, to promote from within and be okay. But it's definitely a question or a concern relative to what it's been previously that's worth flagging.
All right, let's go Houston Texans. I think they're Seattle Seahawks are up there, but Houston's one of the more fascinating teams to me because of just some of the moves they made. They trade Laramie Tunsil. That's the biggest one. Get a bunch of picks from Washington for Laramie Tunsil, and they're going to completely reshape their offensive line. Then they made a bunch of moves that were similar to the early Nick Caserio years, where all the deals are short and somewhat cheap. Laken Tomlinson at guard, 1 year, $4.25 million. Darrell Taylor for a year. Sheldon Rankins for a year. Mario Edwards for 2 years, $9.5 million. Derek Barnett for 1 year, $5 million. So you come out of free agency often where you see teams in like the Bears, it's like they added all these resources on the offensive line. The Texans, their defensive line, much like the Bills, their defensive line 2 deep is set. Like they are ready to go into the season on the defensive line. On the offensive line, they're not. They have players who have started before, but I don't know if these are the pieces that they want. So they're going to have to, I think they're drafting multiple players and or in on other guards besides Laken Tomlinson. Can't wait to see what Houston does on the offensive line now.
These are not the linemen you are looking for. Like that offensive line, it's interesting because we talked about the Laramie Tunsil trade. They got an extra pick in there that we weren't talking about the last time. It's like a 2nd and a 3rd and a 7th, and then swapping 4th round. So we were missing the 7th round pick in the deal. There was an extra pick that the Texans are getting, but it is the lowest pick you can get. So they've traded away Laramie Tunsil, who was the one good member of a terrible offensive line last year, which itself is interesting, right? Like you get rid of Laramie Tunsil, who is an elite level pass blocker, who commits more penalties than most offensive linemen, maybe all offensive linemen, if you factor in his entire career, is a reasonable, not great run blocker. But the big kind of the analysis from anybody that's close to the Texans is like, this guy is a locker room problem. Like it's not that we think we're getting better because we're trading away Laremy Tunsil on the offensive line. It's because we think this guy's an asshole and we want him out of the building, effectively, is the analysis there. So they have opted into, let's get some draft picks, let's try and rebuild the whole thing. But it does put them in a spot where an offensive line that had one good player and 4 problem spots now may have no good players and 5 problem spots, with CJ Stroud going into year 3, coming off a down year. Like, you rarely see a team opt into this amount of chaos and turnover when their young quarterback is like right in the middle of the rookie deal. And like, theoretically, this should be go time, right? And instead, they're like, actually, let's take one of our best players and get him the hell out of here because he's a problem.
The thing about Tunsil too, I mean, look, we don't know the locker room stuff. We can only go with what we've heard. And if that's all true, that's fine. Maybe you had to make the move and you got a decent haul for him to give yourself an opportunity to replenish. But I also remember we preach creep back toward average all the time. And the idea behind that is don't have any massive holes on your offensive line. Unless you have such a problem spot. And if you remember back when Bill O'Brien traded for Laremy Tunsil, the left tackle spot was such a problem for the Texans. It was Julian Davenport, who was giving up 3 times more pressure, double the pressure of like the average tackle in the NFL. And Tunsil comes in and like cuts that in a third, right? All of a sudden, if the pressure rate, whatever it was that Davenport had, Tunsil was unbelievable. And it was one player did improve that offensive line a lot from a pass protection standpoint. That's how good Tunsil was relative to what the Texans had previously. That's why we know how difficult it is to find just a capable left tackle right now in this market. And that's why it feels uncomfortable. I think on the positive side for Houston, I mentioned the defensive line and I rattled off all the names, I think, on yesterday's show. They're looking really good. The depth, they are 8 and 9 deep on that defensive line, feeling great about that. And I think up and down the rest of the roster, there aren't a whole lot of needs. And so the picture that I painted was the Tevin Jenkins of the world that are still out there. Maybe it's Mekhi Becton. I mean, there's a guard or two that you could pick up as a starter. They want to kick Titus Howard out to left tackle. I don't know if that's the right play, but maybe he fills one of those tackle spots, whether it's left or right. I mean, if you can grab 1 or 2 more capable starters on the offensive line, go into the draft 2 or 3 players, 1 starts, these other guys develop, like, you can reshape this thing pretty quickly if you're the Texans, despite the discomfort that comes from losing a guy as good as Laremy Tunsil on paper.
Yeah, you can. I don't think this line is like, I don't think it's a complete lost cause. It's not, there's no talent on this group at all. It's a disaster. We need 5 new players to come in. Like, there is the components of most of a good offensive line already on the roster from a personnel standpoint, I think. It shouldn't have been as bad as it was a year ago. So you also have the element of like, how much can they figure that part of it out? Like, so much of the failing last year was, as you said, it was like they'd never seen a stunt before. They'd never seen any of these pressure looks. And every time you threw anything at them that was supposed to invalidate, pass protection rules, the thing just collapsed and there was a wide open rusher. Like, how much is just fixing that change the offensive line completely, right? So, and I don't know if they can do that, but like, that's an offseason task for them, right? Forget upgrading the personnel. Like, let's get this on the right page. How do we actually pick up stunts, pressures, sim pressures, complicated looks? Let's actually try and work on the protection rules here. So that's one part. Number 2, like, Titus Howard, the 2 good years that he's had of come at right tackle, I think putting him at the left side is vaguely insane. It's one of those things where all the evidence of his career says he's a pretty good right tackle and substandard at any other position, whether it's left guard, whether it's left tackle. I would not be wanting to throw him out there left tackle and just hope that works.
The problem there, though, that's last year's 2nd round pick. Blake Fisher is a right tackle and never really played on the left side. And like, he struggled last year, but he was a rookie and you're hoping he's a developmental right tackle for you. So you have 2 right tackles when you need one. A left.
Yeah. But I think the solution to that is to put them both at right tackle. And if Blake Fisher can't beat out Titus Howard, you're comfortable that you've got a fairly good right tackle, like, solved. Right. And okay, that means Blake Fisher is now a backup, but tough shit. It's just the way the NFL goes, right? So now you know you need a left tackle.
This is how close it is. Lance Zierlein had them trading up for Kelvin Banks in a mock pre-Laramie Tunsil trade, and now they have the draft ammo to do that.
Right.
Like if they signed Tevin Jenkins today and then traded up for Kelvin Banks at left tackle,
yeah,
I'd be feeling much better about it already.
Right.
And Titus Howard plays right tackle, or battles Fisher at right tackle, Tevin Jenkins at right guard, maybe left guard and center is still a question mark, but you have Kelvin Banks as your starting left tackle going forward. I think you're in a much better spot. So it's close, and that's what I'll be looking for right now. And to me, they're fascinating because they already had a massive need at offensive line, and then took the one guy who looked like the most dependable and traded him.
And again, I mean, Cam Robinson is out there, right? As a starting caliber left tackle.
True.
Is Cam Robinson a downgrade over Laramie Tunsil? Absolutely. Is he an upgrade over Titus Howard at left tackle? Also, absolutely. So, there are fixes out there.
All right, man. Anything else on the Texans before we wrap it up with the AFC West?
No.
All right, AFC West. We already talked about the Broncos. They're done. If you're tuning in just now, go back to the beginning because the Broncos were Sam's favorite AFC team, really mine as well. So a couple hours ago, we already talked about the Broncos. Let's go Las Vegas Raiders, though, first up here. Raiders make their biggest move, of course, trading for Geno Smith, third-round pick, to bring Geno in to be the QB of the future. Alex Kappa, they picked him up after he got released by the Cincinnati Bengals. He'll come in, likely compete at right guard. And then Jeremy Chin comes in, 2 years, $16 million, the safety/linebacker hybrid coming from the Commanders. They re-signed Malcolm Kuntz, 1 year, $12 million. I liked that move. And then just yesterday, cornerback Eric Stokes for 1 year, $4 million. So those second and third tier moves, Kuntz, Stokes, they re-signed Adam Butler as well a few days ago, kind of like some of those moves by the Raiders.
Yeah, I think it's been a quietly good offseason for them. The moves that they've made are not splashy, but I think they're pretty solid. Eric Stokes, like $4 million for Eric Stokes. His career is completely ran upon the rocks. But like after right at the start of his career, he looked like he might kick on and become like an elite young corner. He's got the tools. He's got the former, high end draft pick pedigree. At $4 million, I'm all for kicking the tires on guys like that. So I like those moves. Bringing back Malcolm Kuntz for $12 million for 1 year, I think is a great move for them. You obviously re-signed Max Crosby to a monster contract as well. But then obviously the biggest thing they did was the Geno Smith trade, and that gives them a quarterback.
So I mentioned this the other day. I really thought that I put the poll out there. Who would you rather have, Geno Smith or Sam Darnold? And I really thought it would be closer to 50-50. It was more like 60-40, 70-30. It was Geno. It was well in favor of Geno Smith. I thought people would have I thought they'd have more recency bias toward Darnold's career, but maybe toward his season. But maybe the recency bias was Darnold's 2 games that we saw. But I think people leaned into the multiple years of dependable production from Geno Smith. He has been a good top half of the league type of quarterback the last couple of years. The only thing I question for the Raiders is if they should be trying to hit home runs instead of just being good. And home runs meaning I'm in the division with a Patrick Mahomes and a Justin Herbert and an ascending Denver Broncos team. Like Geno Smith gives them the ability to win 8 or 9 games, I think, every year. But do you think you're going to compete with the Chiefs? Maybe, if you build the rest of the roster well enough. So yeah, interesting move for the Raiders, who coming in, I said, should not punt on this year, but every move should be 2026 and beyond. And they said, no, we're going to compete right away. So I think they will be competitive with Geno Smith as they add some pieces around him.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you, but I just don't know what the swing would have been to try and, make that massive move for them. Again, they're not really, I mean, they could trade up massively in the draft and go get one of the top guys, but I that feels super aggressive, like Carolina Panthers going to get Bryce Young levels of aggressive, which I can understand, but I don't know if that's necessarily better than just getting Geno and hoping you can build around him. So I'm okay with that. I think I think getting Geno for what they got for him, pairing him back with Pete Carroll, I think that's a good move for them. Like that gave them an answer to quarterback. It might not be an answer that can beat Patrick Mahomes, 4 times out of 10, but I think it's a good answer given where they were.
I know we've talked about their offensive line being in decent shape. I think it's still a little projection. They would need an Alex Kappa to get back to what he was previously, not the way he played last year. Maybe right tackle is enough of a question that they need to address that. DJ Glaze, up and down at that spot. Definitely need a receiver, more of I always say a true number one, but just Jacoby Myers is a really good two. I think you just want somebody better than Jacoby Myers to complement Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. And then defensively, I like the simple moves of Adam Butler and Malcolm Kuntz, like I said, but need more on the defensive side of the ball, especially the secondary. So more work to be done. Like other teams, as you mentioned, nothing splashy, but I think John Spytek comes in just with Pete Carroll, just trying to get this roster in order around the periphery, kind of like the Texans a couple years ago. And now it's like, all right, where are the other big players, the star type players that you can add to this roster, either through the draft or when the right guys come available in free agency or via trade?
Yeah, they're an interesting team in the draft now because they got like 9 picks. I think they got a couple of comp picks in there. Then they're both in the 6th round, but still, their picks are positioned pretty, high or in good positions in this draft. They obviously pick number 6 overall, which if you want a quarterback might not be the place to be, unless you love Shedeur Sanders and there is substance to the idea that he's slipping. But that like 6 overall might be a great spot for like an elite talent at a different position, whether it's wide receiver, running back with Ashton Genty, one of these other positions. They then pick 37, so pretty high up in the 2nd round. Maybe that is actually where you want to be drafting Jackson Dart instead of in the 1st round. They could add him and have Geno Smith's succession plan at some point. 68. So right now I'm looking at a mock draft for the Raiders where their most likely picks are Ashton Genty at 6, Jackson Dart at 37, and then TCU wide receiver Jack Beck at 68. That would be a pretty sweet 3-round haul for them.
I don't hate Genty for them. I was just predicting Genty could be their guy. They do want to have Geno for the next few years. I think it's early. I think they're going to commit to him to the point where they're not ready for the succession plan. Because I could see it. Because if they go Genty and then say they got our guy Jaden Higgins at 37, and now you got Higgins and Myers, and you have Genty, and then Besh too. I know you got later, but man, I don't think they're going to go QB. I think they're committed to Geno for the next few years.
I mean, I also Geno being 34, I think you would be smart to at least consider quarterback.
Yeah, I just feel like it might be more next year than this year. That's just my prediction. But you have enough picks. I would at least get somebody in the building for sure. And by the way, I wasn't trying to imply that they don't have stars. I'll tell you about the defensive line. Obviously, they have Max Crosby locked up now. Signed Christian Wilkins last year. Didn't get to see them together a whole lot. Tyree Wilson, as much as we talked about him being overdrafted at 7, I think is making strides. And we mentioned Kuntz coming back. They've got the makings of a defensive line moving in the right direction. Add a couple more pieces there as well, especially on the interior, a big-bodied, 330-pounder, like we have some of these in the draft. I think they're moving in the right direction there, but just talent influx both sides of the ball here for the Raiders is needed.
Yep.
Who's next on my list?
Well, before we get to the next team, Carlos in the chat pointed out we did skip over the Houston Texans trading for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. We've talked about that previously in free agency, but they effectively traded away Kenyon Green, who was a bust 1st-round guard, and brought in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. That's a really nice move, I think, for Houston. In fact, that I think is by far the best move they've made so far.
Yeah, I like that move a lot. And, we even like the move for the Eagles just because they have Jeff Stoutland coaching the offensive line. And who knows what you get on a buy low.
I mean, I'm not saying I like it for Philadelphia, but the only thing that makes me interested in it is Jeff Stoutland plus former 1st-round caliber player.
But yeah, I mean, if we want to circle back for the Texans a little bit, I was focused on their defensive line and the fact that I just love the depth that they have there, but in the secondary as well. Derek Stingley coming off a great year. I think they really hit on Kamari Lassiter as a starting corner last year in the 2nd round. Opposite him, CJ Gardner-Johnson added to the mix with Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward I mean, think about Jimmy Ward, CJ Gardner-Johnson, and Jalen Petrie. They're all safety slot hybrids, or at least they were at some point in their
Right.
career. I love the versatility of that secondary, the two outside corners, the defensive line depth. I think the defense is in a really good spot for Houston.
Yeah, and it'll be, first of all, it'll be interesting to see where he plays for them, because Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is one of these guys that's been a slot slash safety hybrid, or done both. So they've now got like two of those guys in Petrie and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who I think are much like Jimmy Ward's done that as well, as you said. But I think those two guys are most recently in that sort of hybrid role. Which one of those guys is actually going to play the slot for them? The other thing I like about it, I think it shows an awareness of, like, a self-awareness. A lot of people talked up Kalen Bullock last year because he had 5 interceptions and a couple of those plays were splashy. He was, however, at the root cause of a lot of terrible plays within that defense. And this theoretically should get him out of the starting lineup when, a lot of other people have been like, look at this guy, young star on the rise, 5 picks, rookie, fantastic. And instead the Texans are like, dude, did you see the negative reel here? We've got to get that guy off the field and work on that stuff before we can, get the positive stuff out of him.
That happens all the time, Sam. If there's like one thing that our career has been over the last 10 to 15 years, it's stop looking at just these positive plays. There are bad football plays out there too where guys don't get blamed.
Right.
No offense. Don't get blamed enough, or it just gets ignored because they don't show up on the stat sheet. There's no stat that's like, oh, you busted 12 coverages. Until there was.
But it's good because sometimes I think NFL teams get suckered into that. Like, sometimes the teams themselves are like, oh, look at these good plays. Like, the splat will live with some mistakes. I think it's a good sign that they've been like, actually, we've seen the bad as well.
Yeah, and by the way, I think he's got very good free safety potential, but it helps them not have to rely on him in year 2 unless he properly develops. And if he properly develops, great. He could win the job again. But adding depth, that's where Houston is, right? They have depth all across their roster. Add another viable threat at receiver, and then attack the offensive line. And I think Houston's in a pretty good spot. Let's go Los Angeles Chargers. We got the Chargers and the Chiefs to discuss here in the AFC West. The biggest one for the Chargers, bringing back Khalil Mack, 1 year, $18 million. Love that move. They bring in Dante Jackson at cornerback for 2 years, $13 million. Before it all started, they extended Elijah Molden at safety for 3 years, $18.75 million. He was coming off of an injury, but I liked getting their starting safety back. I think they have a find in Molden. And then Najee Harris at running back for 1 year, up to $9+ million. So remember, this is a Ravens-like regime. This is the Ravens front office personnel that came in with Jim Harbaugh last year. And these are Ravens-like moves, right? They're not going to make the big moves in free agency, even though they're capable of doing it. But I thought these were some good moves to keep some of their defensive players intact.
Yeah, I mean, the Khalil Mack move, I think, is a steal from their point of view. I'm almost certain he would have been able to get better money than that on the open market. So to get him back for that deal, I think is great for them. They let Joey Bosa go. That's kind of the other part of that tandem. So they still have some weaknesses or holes that they need to address, but I think they made a couple of good moves there.
They're the other team, like I mentioned, Evan Ingram visiting the Broncos. Tight end need here. If they could bring Ingram in, I think either team, it'd be great to just kind of fill that tight end spot before you get into the draft. Certainly want to see them add a more viable wide receiver threat opposite Ladd McConkey. If you could bump Quentin Johnston down to your 3 at receiver, where he showed flashes. He had that 113 catch game, but we know he's still so inconsistent catching the ball. But if he's just your number 3 and you have a dependable 1/2 next to Ladd McConkey, I think that's going to work wonders. But Ingram would help that quite a bit for the Chargers as well.
What kind of impact do you think that Najee Harris has on this team? Because we were talking about they might be in with the Amari and Hampton type of sweepstakes in the draft, like a first-round running back. This was a team that didn't invest in running back at all last year. They brought in 2 guys that were like former Ravens castoffs, one of whom, J.K. Dobbins, was their best back, but the list of leg injuries that he's dealt with in his career is insane. Gus Edwards as well. And so that, they haven't invested in running back. They need a running back, but Najee Harris comes in.
I think Najee is like the opposite of J.K. Dobbins. So Dobbins injuries, and then the fact that if you give him a crease, he's gonna pick up his 50 and 60 yarders like he kept doing last year for the Chargers. Najee's the opposite in that he's incredibly durable. It always feels like he's running hard. There's like 5 different times in Najee's career where I was ready to write him off, and then I'm like, oh, Najee's running hard, right? He's breaking tackles. But it's like it was the old Trent Richardson breaking tackles to nowhere, and this my Bijan Robinson criticism. I'm like, that run was spectacular, but it went for 15. That's Najee. That's the opposite of J.K. Dobbins, which I think is good for Greg Roman and the Chargers. I think he's a keep you on schedule type of player, durability, not going to keep you from like an Omarion Hampton if he's available, or a big play threat if they're available. So I think that's what Najee brings to the table. Breaks a ton of tackles, kind of gets what's there, leaves you wanting more explosive plays, but he's going to be out there churning, and you don't have to deal with the injuries that you dealt with last year if you're the Chargers.
I'm a little loath to, it feels like a pejorative, right? Because I think we've turned it into a bit at this point, but he was a good player when he was in the NFL. Like, is he just the updated version of Thomas Jones?
Maybe, but I don't think Thomas Jones like broke tackles at this level. Let me just say, like, as former PFF guys who used to, grade all these players in every play, I think when PFF started tracking missed tackles forced, for the first time ever, it became a little overrated. And there's certain players like Jamal Charles got underrated because he didn't necessarily break tackles. He just outran everybody and averaged like 5.5 yards per carry, which is better than forcing 3 missed tackles and picking up 4. And so I think we used to even Marshawn Lynch at times maybe even overrated some of his runs, which were spectacular 12-yard runs when Jamal Charles just needed a crease and Jahmyr Gibbs just needs a crease and they're going to take it to the house. So Najee, I think, is on that spectrum, whereas Thomas Jones, it was just like he gets what's there and it's 3.8 per carry and whatever. Whereas Najee's closer to this Trent Richardson, break a lot of tackles, but it's just not. It's not as efficient as it could be because he's, I don't know, missing some explosiveness or whatever it might be. So I don't know if Thomas Jones is the perfect comp because we used to joke about him. He was like calibrated to average 3.8, 3.9. I mean, Najee gets there. That's where he gets. Maybe with better run blocking with the Chargers, he'll be a 4-2, 4-3 type of guy.
Yeah, we only have PFF only has from 2006 onwards his career, but Thomas Jones finished with a perfect 4.0 career yard per carry average during the time the grading level of PFF. I wonder what his actual career was. He broke some tackles.
Yeah. What was he missed tackles per attempt? Because Najee's 0.2, 0.2, 0.24.
Yeah, not good. Not good.
Jones didn't miss a ton. Yeah. So,
but as I said,
anyway,
when you have the back end of his career as opposed to the first half,
the results end up similar to Najee. I mean, he's not like Saquon Barkley impact. They're not winning the Super Bowl because of Najee Harris, but I think they won't have to deal with as much of the revolving door that they had last year at running back. And if they add an explosive complement like Jaylen Warren was for Pittsburgh, I think you've got a nice 1-2 punch there.
Which I wonder, could that be, Vidal, how, like, that guy's name changed 4 times during the course of the season. Like, maybe that could be Vidal in the backfield. Or they bring back J.K. Dobbins. But you're right. Like, if you take away Gus Edwards and put in Najee Harris as like the durable bus within that run offense, that should be a significant upgrade for them. Somebody in the chat there was asking why everyone is pretending that Khalil Mack is still good. He hasn't, been good in 4 years, whatever. Number one, Mack is like one of the best run defending edge rushers in football, always has been for his entire NFL career. He had a down year and a half, one of which he was injured in, where he wasn't good against the run. But outside of that, has been the best run defending edge rusher in the game, basically since he entered the league. But in the last 2 years, he's gotten a ton of pressure as well. Hasn't necessarily had the sack totals outside of that one ridiculous game where he got like 6 or whatever it was against the Raiders, was it? But this last year he had 50 plus pressures, pass rushing grade almost of 80. The year before that, it was at 86. I'm not sure what the evidence is that he isn't good at this point.
Yeah, and it's a 1-year deal at $18 million, where you have essentially 2 starting edge spots open. Tuli's on the other side with Joey Bosa gone. Tui Peloto, my goodness,
Wow.
Tuli Tuipulotu. If you needed a starter, that was a good move. Look, I was ready to write off Khalil Mack a couple years ago too, and then he had the 6-sack game
Right.
against it, which was more Aiden O'Connell than anything. But still, he's still better than a lot of the players making more money or comparable money. So I think Khalil Mack's still fine, even if he's not elite level. All right, you ready to talk Chiefs and wrap it up?
Sure.
Kansas City Chiefs, Jalen Moore, the tackle from the San Francisco 49ers, he comes over for 2 years, $30 million. Christian Fulton at cornerback, 2 years, $20 million. Of course, they franchise tagged Trey Smith at starting right guard. And the other big move that they made is trading Joe Thuney for a 4. Their starting left guard. Nick Bolton also comes back for 3 years, $45 million at linebacker. Marquise Brown back as well, 1 year, up to $11 million for the Chiefs. So retaining some of their own. And the biggest one's going to be that Jalen Moore move. And can he shore up the left tackle spot that's been a revolving door for the Chiefs the last few years?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like the Chiefs discussion, I think, has got to be about how they handled their offensive line, right? They trade away. So part of it is they trade away Joe Thuney to the Chicago Bears. They decided, like, look, he's been their best offensive lineman, but he's due a new deal. He's getting up in years. We already have a ton of money invested in this offensive line. We just can't throw the next contract at Joe Thuney. So they trade him away, but it means that they do keep Trey Smith. They tag him. That's a significant chunk invested in him. And then the left tackle fix, I guess, ends up being Jalen Moore, who's this wildly unproven commodity at left tackle. So just a really interesting approach to this offensive line for Kansas City.
I wonder how much Mike Bergonzi's the new GM with the Titans, and he was the GM who makes the final call on Dan Moore making the $20 million. Bergonzi just got the job a month and a half ago, whatever it was. The Chiefs were having this discussion before. What do we do at left tackle? I wonder how much they knew where the market was going to go for Dan Moore. And they said, well, we can't do that. We have to, because they got Jalen Moore early. Like they pounced on this. This wasn't like, hey, we're in on Dan Moore. We're in on Cam Robinson. We're in on the
he was clearly a target. Yeah.
They went and got Jalen Moore. So I wonder how much they knew the market was going to go really high. Well, because if they brought in Dan Moore, you'd say, all right, at a similar price, they would say, okay.
Yeah.
But it's an unproven Jalen Moore who has 446 career pass blocking reps. That's it. That's a season's worth of reps in 4 years for the 49ers. And again, it was pretty good, but honestly, he might be that same left tackle where he's fine a lot of games, but in the Eagles, facing the Eagles in the Super Bowl and maybe the Bills when they're trotting out Rousseau and Bosa, it could be trouble. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic here to see if Jalen Moore does develop into a franchise left tackle for the Chiefs.
It's just such a small sample size to be gambling on. Like it might be the thing with Dan Moore is we have years of him starting and like it's a fairly extensive sample size that he is absolute ass against Myles Garrett and actually halfway decent against everybody else. With Jalen Moore, it's like, you're dealing with this career where it's almost random, right? Like there's no pattern to when he has a good game versus a bad game because there's so few of the games that we don't know, number one, what his baseline will be. And number two, is there like a pattern of this is the type of player he's going to struggle against? This is where he's good. It's just like, there's sort of 8 games, 10 games, whatever it is total. And half of them are good, half of them are not. And who knows what that equals.
Tershawn Wharton also he signed a big deal with the Carolina Panthers. So he's out. I mean, the Chiefs have to replenish on the defensive line. I like what they did with Christian Fulton coming in. He can potentially compete with Jalen Watson to start opposite Trent McDuffie, or McDuffie kicks back into the slot. You have Jalen Watson, Christian Fulton on the outside. Good depth there. They brought Bolton back, who they called the Patrick Mahomes of the defense. Although I know at least one Kansas City Chiefs fan who hates Nick Bolton, always criticizes him. But I think Bolton's been a fine player for them. And I like bringing back Marquise Brown. We pegged Marquise Brown with every wide receiver needy team.
Yeah.
Bring him in on the cheap. And with him, Xavier Worthy, and Rashee Rice coming back, if they're all healthy and out there and not suspended, then, it's a pretty good explosive trio.
Yeah, Hollywood Brown for 1 year, 11 million, I think is great. I mean, we basically didn't get to see the impact that he could have within that offense. I know he made it back for the playoffs, et cetera, but like, who knows how much of an impact not being there for the amount of time he was injured had on what they were actually going to use him for. I'm really interested to see what this offense looks like next year with the healthy complement of receivers, right? Xavier Worthy heading into the next year, Hollywood Brown back. Rashee Rice theoretically back from his knee injury. Like, what is that group going to look like now that they have all the pieces they want? Nick Bolton's interesting because, I mean, he's the sort of classic old school, tackling machine, downhill thumper type of guy, but has real limitations in coverage or out in space. 15 million a year for him feels kind of rich to me. I might have moved on if I was Kansas City and you're juggling the contracts that you've got, the money that you've got to spend. I might have looked to go somewhere else with that cash, but I get it. I mean, those types of middle linebackers tend to have a leadership value, those types of things that are harder to quantify. So I think you can kind of give them the benefit of the doubt there. Christian Fulton, I'm not wild on as a player, but 2 years, $15 million is dirt cheap for that kind of gamble. So why not? And then, I think the fascinating element is like it's the juggling act that they've done on the offensive line and where they've chosen to invest the money and those types of things. The rest of the moves, I think, have been pretty solid.
We got some sensitive people saying in the fix them in 5 minutes segment, we said the Chiefs are going to suck. We did not say that. Not even close. I think, by the way, the Jalen Moore move, because remember every single Chiefs mock draft, we were like, hey, Josh Connolly's available. Just draft this next late first round left tackle. Having Jalen Moore at left tackle, though, now you can look at the guard group, and if it's a Tyler Booker or some of the other guards, second, third, fourth round, it's easier to find a starting guard anyway in the first 3-4 rounds in the draft than it is a starting tackle late first or beyond. So they at least have a starting left tackle, whether you trust Jalen Moore or not. And I think they use one of their top picks on a guard. And then the guard competition is Kingsley Suamataia. It's Mike Caliendo, who started there late last season, and then the new rookie. So I think that's what they've opened up the ability to do, right? Add some D-line depth in the draft and pick a guard that can compete for the starting spot at left guard.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think they should have added a veteran at tackle rather than trying to hope that the developmental first round tackle that's going to be available where they pick is the guy, because that's just not worked for them recently. So I'm all for solving that with a veteran. I'm just interested that Jalen Moore was the target, like this guy who has more unknown about him than I think pretty much any other option they could have gone for. It's just fascinating to me that they identified him. As you said, it's not like this was the last guy available and they just had to grab somebody. It's like they clearly targeted Jalen Moore as the guy that was the answer to this thing, which I think is really interesting given his career, just given how little sample size, how much unknown there is to him. So that's pretty fascinating. I think Suamataia might be the answer at left guard for them. They already moved him in there in that meaningless Week 18 game, which suggests that they might just give him the shot to win that job. I'm all for adding another body in the draft, make that a competition rather than just anointing him as that left guard. But he might be the guy that starts there for them. But yeah, like it's, this team that was, a Super Bowl away from like greatest dynasty ever talk, it has quite a lot of like question marks and sort of flux and just general turnover and turmoil than we're used to.
Say it with me, Sam. Big draft for the Chiefs. It's a big draft. I know they just opened up $50 million of cap space, restructuring Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones just for the average fan who thinks that's like a mind-blowing thing. That's, the expected move, right? The Chiefs are opening up the cap space to make these moves that they just agreed to the last couple of days. So that's why that's all happening.
For Mahomes in particular, I mean, that was basically the whole point of that contract, right? Is this was how this deal is going to work every single year. They will restructure that deal and free up a ton of cap space.
All right, man. We just touched on the entire AFC. Only took us about 2 hours and 10 minutes. We'll do the NFC tomorrow. I think it's a nice little reset, review everything that's happened, and a look forward, what it all means for the rest of free agency and the draft. So I've had a fun week here, Sam, just talking free agency nonstop. So we'll continue it again tomorrow. It's 10:30 a.m. Eastern, the usual Check the Mic time every Wednesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. and, of course, Monday at 9 a.m. And a reminder for those in podcast land, we've got extra special stuff on YouTube. We go live. We have some exclusive stuff that's video only on YouTube. Need you to come join us. Come join us and subscribe. We're close to 35,000 subscribers. If you haven't clicked that button yet, please continue clicking that button. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again tomorrow with more Check the Mic.